Ladies and gentlemen, recorded in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada, it's time for Fight Night Picks with your hosts, Craig and Matt Allen.
Folks, you know me at this point, at Craig Allen FNP. You can find me there on Twitter and Instagram. With me to my left, as always, on your right, Matt Allen, respective socials, at Matt Allen FNP. Fight Night Picks fans, they know this. If we have a bad week, we're going to let you know. We're going to post it in the YouTube community tab. We're going to kind of talk about it a little bit on the show. If we have a good week, we're going to also post it in the YouTube community tab. We're not really going to look in the rearview mirror, and we're going to move forward. Last weekend, we both went 11-3 at the end of the night. Kind of hit the skids because ultimately Caio Borralho throws the illegal strike, but it ends up as a technical decision. And then in the main event, a wonderful showing by Belal Muhammad. But I say all of this because we like to be very, very transparent, very open and honest with everybody. And I'm going to be open and honest, and I'm going to say this is one of the strangest UFC Fight Night cards I've ever seen. Name value-wise, not the best one we've ever seen. 5 ranked fighters on this card. You have Amanda Lemos taking on the number 1 ranked flyweight, Jessica Andrade. This one down at strawweight. You have Manel, Kape, you have Sumudaerji. Those two guys fighting against each other. And you have Barber at 14 at flyweight taking on a tricky fighter in Montana De La Rosa. But other than that, tons of long layoffs, people coming back in fights, and also the only 0-1 fighter with a no contest making the return. It's Michael Jackson time. Taking on Dean Barry. But really, ultimately, Matt, we always punch up. We always have a good time. And we will. Don't get us wrong. But taper your expectations a little bit and get fired up. Because I think we're going to bring some flavor and some flair to some of these fights that people might not be overly amped about.
This card is like the Hellman's mayonnaise of all cards. Not great, not terrible, just kind of plain, you know? But, like you said, we're here to spice it up a little bit, and these are always the cards that do overperform or exceed your expectations. I know we're both really excited for, like, Jourdain and Lando Vannata. That is one of those fights that no matter what is going to be a barn burner. But I will say this, like, going into UFC London, I know that ended up being, like, card of the year. It was super good. We all kind of expected that going into it. That's one of those cards that beforehand, you go to your non-MMA watching fans or friends and you say, hey, watch UFC London. This is something you guys will really be able to get on board with. I'm not sure if Amanda Lemos versus Jessica Andrade is that same kind of card, but I will say this about the main event. I'm super excited for, especially these two women being in the main event, because at the flyweight division, we don't often see non-title main events. There's not often that you do get main events here or there for fight night cards, and I do think Jessica Andrade is at least a recognizable enough name. She's fought in multiple different weight classes, been successful in multiple different weight classes. It's really nice to see her get this really big opportunity, and then opposite her with Amanda Lemos, I think we know how good Amanda Lemos is been. The real hardcores have always sort of followed her. They realize how dangerous she is. This is her opportunity to really figure out, okay, where do I fit in amongst everyone else in this division? Because one big win at strawweight or flyweight can basically get you to a title shot.
And
nowadays.
To offer up the correction, yes, this main event is at strawweight. Jessica Andrade moving back down to 115. She had a bit of a foray there. Recently unsuccessful in her title bid against Valentina Shevchenko. However, she does just have a first-round finish over Cynthia Calvillo not that long ago. Lemos, big fight against Angela Hiller last time out. Picks up a big decision win there. Throw it on over to the Fight of the Night screen by Fight Night Picks. And like I said, let's have some fun with this and let's talk some 2 can't-miss fights coming up this weekend.
Let us know down below in the comments section who you've got. It's time for the Fight of the Night with Fight Night Picks.
All right, so last weekend, Canada, and realistically it was Ontario, went 0-2 on the night. We had Jesse Ronson, not able to get it done against Rafa Garcia. We had TJ Laramie, who was sent to the pit of the wolves against the man himself, Pat Sabatini. Now this weekend, you've got Quebec taking on the world. You've got Jourdain taking on Lando Vannata. You also have Marc-Andre Barriault taking on Jordan Wright. But when it comes to this fight, this one's great. I mean, Lando Vannata started off his UFC tenure with 4 bonuses. 3 of them were Fight of the Nights, and he's had a Fight of the Night since then. But it's been kind of a weird run. And for Jourdain, is he the best 3-3 with a draw in the UFC? Like, he realistically could be. So both these guys vying to move up the ladder at 145. Some people might go, what? Lando Vannata, 145? He made his move down for the first time against Mike Grundy in his last fight, but I know we're really amped up about this one. It should be a great fight.
Both of these fighters are offensive dynamos, but also defensively irresponsible to say the least. And I think that's why this fight's going to be so good. Lando Vannata is kind of interesting. He's like an NBA player who makes an all-star game in their first season, maybe second season, and then they just never really reach those same heights ever again. And it's nothing against Lando. His level of competition has been very high ever since coming over to the UFC, but I think everybody had much higher hopes for him and his UFC career than what we've got so far. But I think this is perfect matchmaking. When you put someone like Vannata in with a guy like Jourdain, the wins and losses don't really matter. I think we're all just excited for what this fight could be, and I think it's going to be fight of the night without a doubt.
Like a one-time all-star in any sport, for me, I'm going to go with former relief pitcher for your Toronto Blue Jays, like a Steve Delabar.
Ooh,
Steve
I was going to say Chris Kaman.
Delabar. Chris Kaman, he got it done with that beard. Big time fight that you're not going to want to miss right there. How do you not pick the main event? Like, we never do this with Fight Night Picks, but we're going to do it because realistically it's strawweight. You have fire meeting fire. You have Brazil meeting Brazil. And listen, we threw this one out there. It was a poll. We asked you to vote for the thumbnail for this video. We always do a YouTube community tab at Fight Night Picks on Instagram as well. But in this one, a lot of people were like, what's going on in that one? Like, what's with all the colors?
I thought it was pretty obvious.
It's a Brazilian flag, and you have Brazil's best and brightest right now. Now, Amanda Lemos, a little bit older in her career, came into the UFC at bantamweight, took on Leslie Smith. There was a lot of time off. Had that fight against, a really, really tricky fighter her last time out in Angela Hill. And you factor everything into it. Amanda Lemos, other than that last fight, and even in that last fight, knocks everybody down and dead. So, listen, Angela Hill, credit where it's due to come back up and fight back in that fight. But Jessica Andrade, cut from the same cloth. Buzzsaws at 115. I love this one.
Jessica Andrade fights like a female John Lineker. That's the best way I can describe it. It's all offense all the time. A lot of forward pressure. Never stops throwing hooks. It is kind of insane, her level of cardio, just for the amount of output that she has in her fights. But this is sort of a meet-in-the-middle fight. For Andrade, she was a champion. We all know how good she is. But she is 2-3 in her last 5. So it's not the best of looks. But for Lemos, like you said, knocking everybody out, this is where we really do figure out how good Amanda Lemos is. Because you might look at Andrade and think, okay, maybe she's near the end of her prime, maybe a little bit past her prime. But no matter what, she's going to be a very, very tough out for Lemos. So this is a very fun fight because we're going to learn a lot about both fighters.
Should be a great one. Big time standing up at this division. Esparza taking on Nama Yunus. And then you also have Marina Rodriguez hanging around somewhere out there. A lot of movers and shakers. This one offers up a different look, and Lemos ranked 10th. You've got the number 1 ranked flyweight in Jessica Andrade. Should be a great one. Hit us up down below in that comment section. Let us know who you have as a possible fight that's coming up this weekend. So plenty of returns coming up this weekend. I know everybody loves the housekeeping. Mike Jackson, he's been off for a time or two. You've got Sergey Khandozhko, Felipe Lins. You've got, who else? Tyson Pedro, that's a big one. I know a lot of people are excited about that one. Cameron Else, the one time out on short notice against Kyler Phillips, did not go well. And Louis Cosce had a fight of the night against Sasha Palatnikov, lost. Now he trains with Palatnikov. So a lot of people making those returns. And listen, this is one of those weeks where you might be down on the card. We're going to have some fun with it. And when you go to B-Dub-Dubs and hang out with a group,
we're going to give you some great information to tell your friends so that you'll look like an expert in front of them, even if maybe you're not.
Let that host or hostess know and tip them well. A big-time card coming up this weekend. Make sure you check out Fight Night Picks !Kicks. That's 2 hours before the prelims here on the channel. Toss a sub, toss a like. I want to see tons of likes. Let's just juice that up there this week. Have a good time. Enjoy it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. And as we always say, let's get into it. Every weekend you have a why type of fight. And coming up this weekend, we have the sniper, Dean Barry, making his UFC debut. He is from Ireland. Does he know Conor McGregor? No, he doesn't. Stop asking him about it. He'd like to meet him, but no, he doesn't know him, and he doesn't want you to ask. I read that in an interview from balls.ie.
Remember that time we were in Boston, Craig, and there were these people who were like, you're Canadian, why don't you say A after everything? And we're like, really? That's what you
Real
think?
conversation at Fenway
Yeah,
Park.
these people genuinely believe that we said A after everything. Then they go, oh no, you're not from Toronto. They only do that there. Strange thing to tell to a bunch of children who are strangers at the time, but that's like asking Dean Barry if he knows Conor Conor McGregor. Yes, they're from the same country. No, they're not personal friends. Back to you, Craig.
So
Sorry.
fair enough. Dean Barry coming in here again. He's 4-1, taking on Mike Jackson, a guy who has 2 fights to his credit. He's 0-1 with a no contest because, listen, did he beat Chick Magnet Punk? Was it the best fight of UFC 225? Did he then pop for the green flower tops after the fact? Yes, he did. But you know what the craziest part about it is? So I'm going through, I'm doing my research, and I'm thinking in my head, Mike Jackson, he's 1-1, right? Like, he beat CM Punk. I watched that fight. All 3 judges scored at 30-26. That did happen. And then 3 years went by after that fight. And in 2021, MMA Junkie, the sleuths over there, decided to dig into it with the Illinois Commission and went, hey, but he popped for the weed, so that's a no contest, right? Yep. And then Mike Jackson did an interview and said, yep, it is a no contest. So now we're at a point where man who's 0-1 with 1 no contest, like this is Gokhan Saki territory, is looking to prove 1 over, looking to win 1 over. And I have a lot to say about this fight. I actually do. I did a lot of research for this one, so let me pour my brain out onto the table for everybody. But when it comes to this one, I never do this. I never bring up the odds this soon, but Matt,
I'm glad you are, though.
I did not look at the odds for any of these fights. I write them down individually. But before this one, I looked and I went, okay, Barry opened to -700. Mike Jackson opened +525. All right, I get it. So Mike Jackson's a +623, and right now, Dean Barry, -1,027. So I thought, what's the implied probability on that? 91.1% implied probability. Dean Barry wins at 4-1, with very limited pro experience. I mean, only the 5 fights, and we'll get more into Mike Jackson coming up. But Dean Barry, consider it, took on a short notice replacement, Drew Lipton, back in December of last year.
A world beater was Drew Lipton,
who was 6-30 and got knocked out in 21 seconds. That's where we're at coming up this weekend.
This fight, I know we sometimes get on the UFC for having these like prospects who are in their 30s they don't really know a lot about. This is an odd fight though, and I don't really understand why they are giving Mike Jackson another chance. Because this thing with Mike Jackson, it's nothing against him. He can sell a fight better than a lot of unranked fighters can. But he's just kind of like a good regional boxer, I would say. He's a phenomenal photographer, actually. Mike Jackson, please look him up.
His MMA media work is very, very
exceptional.
good.
And that's what he's been doing for the past few years. And that's the thing about Mike Jackson. It never really felt like he was outside of the MMA world, you know? It was a name that would keep on coming up all the time because he hangs out with Derek Lewis a lot. I know they do stuff with his training. And he's a very avid photographer and does a lot in the MMA world. So it wasn't like, oh, Mike Jackson's not really a part of our lives. He always has been sort of around. I just never thought we would see him in the UFC again, because even though he did beat CM Punk, and I am going to refer to that as a win, because we all watched that fight.
World heavyweight champion.
Exactly. Like, Mike Jackson could probably tell some people who don't know a lot about MMA that he was in there with, like, Francis Ngannou. Like, remember Brian Scalabrine won the NBA title, and he was like, yeah, I didn't play a minute, but guess what? In 20 years, I'll tell my kids I started, and in 40 years, I'll tell my grandkids I won Finals MVP. Mike Jackson will kind of be able to bend the story of him beating CM Punk, of like, yeah, I beat the world heavyweight champion. People are like, Francis? And he'll probably not, he just won't add anything else to this story. He just didn't show enough to me in that fight to think that, wow, this guy belongs at the UFC level. And that might be a little harsh to say to a guy coming off a win, but still, he was fighting Chick Magnet Punk, a guy who was very slow, and even though he trained at a really good gym at Rufus Sport, I think we can all agree, he never really seemed to make that much progress between his first fight and his second fight. He didn't have years to train in between those two things, and if you are a world-class athlete and you train at a place like Rufus Sport, like, I know people don't like Greg Hardy, he's a very polarizing figure, but I think we can all agree Greg Hardy was a world-class athlete from another sport who took up MMA on fairly short notice and did make something of himself, though. Like, he went to American Top Team and at least developed skills that we could look at and think, okay, Greg Hardy has made improvements in these areas. CM Punk was never able to do that, and even with Mike Jackson, I know he has had a lot of time off, but how much can we expect for a guy between the ages of 34 and 37 who hasn't been actively competing to genuinely really make big leaps and bounds in his game? I just think we're going to see a very similar version of Mike Jackson this time out that we did against CM Punk, and maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe it's going to be enough to get him to maybe a lopsided decision, but I gotta be honest, I think anybody who can fight at the UFC level and prove themselves at the UFC level, which Dean Barry hasn't been able to do that yet, if we are being honest, should be at least a -700 favorite over Mike Jackson.
So for Mike Jackson, this is the craziest part about this fight in general. This is the Buffalo Wild Wings trivia moment if they sponsored our show, but they don't. So I'll say, when you go to the pub, if you're watching this fight, or maybe you're with the cats in the basement, this is the fact to tell somebody. This is the third time the UFC's booked this fight. And it's not like it was okay. Like, they tried to book it last week and the week before. They tried to book it back in 2021, over a year ago in January. That one fell out. Then they tried to book it back in the late spring in May, and then it fell out. The weirdest part about it, though, is, so for Mike Jackson, CM Punk fight, that was back in 2018. For Dean Barry, so he's supposed to fight Mike Jackson. He's supposed to fight Mike Jackson. Those don't happen. And then he has a fight booked over at Titan FC, and that doesn't happen. Then he actually does fight with Titan FC, and it does happen. Now, he's supposed to take on Hugo Hernando Prada. Prada withdraws, so on a couple days' notice, he gets Drew Lipton, who I mentioned, 6-30, knocks him out in 21 seconds. Lipton runs across the cage for the takedown, and then he gets floored. And then before that, you have Dean Barry fighting at UAE Warriors 13. That card had Manon Fiorot, Chris Barnett, lots of future MMA talent. He wins against Abdullah Al-Bushari, and this is the biggest thing that I have for Dean Barry. He's a guy that trains at Team Ryano. So some big guys at that gym. Miles Price, one of them, you're going to see him with the PFL taking on Anthony Pettis. If you told me that a few years ago, I would not have believed you, but it's going to happen. So Dean Barry, Team Rhino, from Ireland. He's fought in the States in the past, and realistically, again, it's a 4-1 pro record. But if we go back, the Abdullah Al-Bushari fight, he thought he was fighting somebody else, and then they did the old switcheroo, so they gave him a fighter who's 7-1. Al-Bushari comes out looking a weight class bigger, takes him down, and looks super dominant at the start. And then once Dean Barry's able to get back up to his feet, because listen, Dean Barry's a great striker, he's got a kickboxing background, and you see it. He's got great speed on his shots, and he's got sneaky power that
sits down on his shots.
Yeah, you might not really see coming. Nice kicks as well. His takedown defense is the biggest liability of his game. But his ability to get back up to his feet actually isn't that bad. And for Al-Bushari, once it gets back up to the feet, he is completely gassed and has nothing left. The other two wins that Dean Barry has over 1-1 Thomas Thatcher and 1-1 Corey Samuels, the level of competition has not quite been there. And he got submitted by Anthony Pretty Boy Taylor, who's also a boxer occasionally and doesn't like Chris Avila.
No, he does not whatsoever. That's the big point about this fight, though. For me, I feel like Mike Jackson's just having another UFC fight, and I do think Dean Barry, I'm not going to be here to tell you, okay, if he beats Mike Jackson, he's ready to be like a full-time UFC fighter, if you catch my drift. But I do think he's a good enough fighter to beat someone like Mike Jackson. Jackson himself does not have much of a grappling background whatsoever. CM Punk was able to take him down. I know we joke about his heavyweight wrestling background, but like, CM Punk in an MMA case should not be taking many people down. And the little bit of success that Punk was able to have in that fight was on the ground with his wrestling. And I do think that for Mike Jackson, is he a good boxer on the feet? Yes, but he doesn't have a lot of power. He's just sort of an accurate, more of a speedier guy with his hands. I do think he's going to have a hard time at least damaging Dean Barry, because when they are in the pocket together, yes, I think Jackson can put together a couple strikes while he's standing there, but I think the power coming back his way from Barry is going to be much more than whatever Jackson can put out, and that's why I do favor Dean Barry. I would never put money on a guy who's a minus 1,000 in anything, because I value my hard-earned money a litlittle bit too much, but I do understand why Barry is such a big favorite, because for Jackson, have we ever sat here and broken down a guy who's 0-1-1 or 0-1-0 in MMA before? No, we haven't. It's kind of ridiculous.
Red Rover, send Craig over. So, Krubab Perez, Main Street Boxing and Muay Thai, it is the team that Mike Jackson belongs to, MikeTheTruth.com. But when you do look at the way that he fights, it is with that boxing style. Boxing style, not kickboxing style, boxing style. He's a tall guy, he stands straight up, he keeps his hands low, and he kind of throws some of his punches from weird angles. He's got really nice straight shots, and in his last fight against CM Punk, he also had Pat Miletich in his corner, but they definitely had a falling out, so that's not going to happen. You will not see Pat Miletich in his corner. But the craziest part about it for Mike Jackson, so he fights Mickey Gall, and it's like, okay, Gall's 1-0 and looking for a fight. You've got a guy who's a 2011 Houston Golden Gloves champ with pro boxing and amateur experience in Mike Jackson. They fight. So Jackson doesn't win it. So then what do? They go, you know what? Here we go. Let's pull you a thriller. See you later. Go out there and fight, Mr. Rafael Justino. Chris Cyborg's older brother. The fight doesn't happen. He ends up going out there and then getting back with the UFC somehow without fighting in MMA to get the CM Punk fight. And if you remember, the fight between Mickey Gall and Mike Jackson was a loser leaves town. Winner gets Punk. And Gall got Punk. And then he got Northcutt. And then years later, he got Malott, and then he got knocked out. So the weirdest part about it is, for me, you go back, you do all the study you want. You got Mike Jackson on top of CM Punk doing like a YI-OTA and then slamming and then moving his hand and like hitting him. It was weird stuff. Again, the odds are what they are. Dean Barry is more than a minus 1,000 favorite when you look at it live on Best Fight Odds. I'm not even going to guess the Tapology votes because I doubt they're close at all. 97% Dean Barry, 570 total votes, 80% have him to win by knockout for the 3% that have Jackson. 37% by knockout, 58% by decision. I laugh, but Mike Jackson, again, valued member of the MMA media community. He is on that level. He does great work out there and a very interesting Twitter follow. First walkout song that he ever had was not on the Thriller album. He walked out to Bad, and then he had some Houston rappers that you guys know and love his second time out. I asked him on Twitter. He thought it was a weird question, but then he said, you know what? We're bringing back the Houston rap. So good for Mike Jackson, but I'm going Dean Barry. Speed, the kicks, and, MMA shots versus Mike Jackson's boxing. However, Mike Jackson, Muay Thai shorts in the gym. Years away, we could see a rejuvenated Mike Jackson. I gotta go with Barry here.
This might sound harsh, but I look at Mike Jackson in the UFC, kind of like when Tony Romo wore that Dallas Mavericks jersey after he retired. They were like, we're going to let you be on the court. We're going to give you this one chance. I just don't think Mike Jackson's a UFC level fighter. And maybe Dean Barry isn't either. But the fact that this is, Jackson's third fight in the organization is kind of wild to me.
Credit, man.
It's very impressive. Don't get me wrong. But we talked about people who have very, very poor MMA records coming over. Normally they have extremely extensive backgrounds in other martial arts. Guys like Alex Pereira, who are world class at kickboxing, or Gokhan Saki, like you had brought up earlier. Like, Saki was able to kind of get that exemption because we all realized how good of a pure striker he was in a sport that does have quite a bit of crossover between kickboxing and MMA. Mike Jackson is a Golden Gloves level boxer, which is nothing to sneer at by any means. It is a very, very nice accomplishment, but that doesn't mean that you are at the UFC level, and I do expect Dean Barry to win this fight.
Both of us going with Ireland's Dean Barry. Let us know down below in the comments section what you make of this fight. I would love to hear your opinions on this one. We got an interesting card coming up with Amanda Lemos taking on Jessica Andrade in the main event. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. So if the UFC is looking for a tagline, I'll throw this one out there for free for this fight. So it goes a little something like this. Former millionaire prize winner takes on notable zombie. And that is what it is. I mean, Marcin Prachnio coming in here. If you told me he'd be on a 2-fight win streak like 2 or 3 years ago, I wouldn't believe you. I would not believe you one bit.
Where? In Bellator?
And if you told me Philipe Lins was on a 2-fight losing streak after winning 4 fights in a row by finish to win the PFL's inaugural season at heavyweight for $1 million, I would have said, wait, are you kidding me? And Andrei Arlovsky's one of those losses? But listen, that's where we're at right now, coming up this weekend. And for Philipe Lins, he took that fight against Arlovsky. They're training partners. They've trained together extensively. Both American top team guys, still American top team guys. Lins loses that fight by decision. So then what does he do? A couple months later, not even, takes a fight against Tanner Boser. Gets promptly knocked out. That was 1 year and 8 months ago. Philipe Lins, I see him. He's been at the PFL Challenger Series. I see him in the cage there on his Instagram wearing a suit with a blurry photo. So that's kind of fun. But for him, it's odd. And the craziest part about it is, if you look at Philipe Lins' overall Tapology page, there's 6 fights that have fallen out for him since 2020. Don'Tale Mayes, Ben Rothwell. It's like Sunday, but Ben Rothwell. Ovin St. Preux, and then Azamat Murzakanov back in December. Lynn's withdrawing from quite a few of those bookings. So ultimately, he gets the Polish striker, Marcin Prachnio, a guy who is a black belt in karate, and you will see it. And it's an interesting matchup because for Philipe Lins, you look at it, primarily a boxer at heavyweight. Now, I understand everybody's going to say, but Craig, he's not really a heavyweight. No, you're right. By and large, light heavyweight. You look at his last 2 fights with Bellator. Well, he lost those. But I mean, Vadim Nemkov was the last loss.
If I'm being completely honest, I thought physically he did match up with the heavyweights he was in there with the UFC against. I didn't think Arlovsky was that much bigger than him. And the same thing with Boser, too. I didn't feel like, okay, Lins lost those fights because he's the smaller guy.
Just those 2 guys. I mean, yeah, Tanner Boser is one of those, 240 type of guys. And Andrei Arlovsky's not the biggest heavyweight. So for Lins, his last fight out, 234. taking on Prachnio. And listen, credit where it's due. This guy zombied around when he fought Sam Alvey, walked across the cage with his hands down and got hit by a hook and knocked out.
Groceries.
Put on a big-time poster. Then he loses to Magomed Ankalaev, future champ, so that's all right.
I don't think he's future champ, but okay.
Then he got knocked out by Slow Mike Rodriguez. So now we go Alvey, Ankalaev, and Mike Rodriguez. And then you look at the wins. He beats Khalil Roundtree and he beats Ike Villanueva. And this is the weirdest part about it, because on this card coming up this weekend, there's a lot of commonalities. There's a lot of people that have fought each other, like Ike Villanueva's there, Marcin Prachnio's
Would Jada
there.
Pinkett Smith call it an entanglement, perhaps?
I'm not sure where you're going with that.
You don't remember that?
I
That
don't
was the meme?
I don't know memes.
Come on, Craig.
But I do know that Marcin Prachnio, that karate black belt, that speed mixed with power is what got him to the dance before he was in the UFC with one championship, knocking guys senseless. So it was one of those ones where he lost the fights. He took a long time off between the Ankalaev fight and the fight against Slow Mike Rodriguez. And then from Slow Mike to Khalil Roundtree, he only took 5 months off. And since then, now I know, when Roundtree was actually doing things and landing with power, he was giving Prachnio problems. But when Prachnio was able to bring in that speed and the volume, he did a pretty good job in that fight. And then against Ike Villanueva, he won a performance bonus for that one. So,
and we'll talk more about Hurricane Ike later, but that's not the, la creme de la creme of a win.
But realistically, you have two guys trending in opposite directions. And for Felipe Lins, I don't know what to expect this weekend.
I at least like this matchup stylistically for him, because the weird thing for Lins is that the two last guys who he's fought at heavyweight, they're kind of movement-based fighters. And I know that's a weird thing to say for heavyweights, but Andre Arlovski and even Tanner Boser, I'd say they're two of the more elusive guys at the weight class. And for Lins, it was weird. He was much more aggressive back in the PFL, and it just seems like he can't get out of that first gear here in the UFC. It is odd, because normally when you have someone who is a boxer, who relies on their footwork a lot, they're a very active fighter from the second they go until the fight's over. But against his last two opponents, I don't know if it has been their footwork, if it's just been their upticks in volume. He's never really been able to settle into the fight, which has really been interesting to see, because that is not the fighter who fought in the PFL. And normally, okay, you have one fight, octagon jitters, that's fine. Two fights, though, fighting like this, I'm worried if he is just a little bit past his prime, because that's the thing about Lins. I know we get on a lot of prospects who come into the UFC who are in their 30s. Lins isn't like all of them, though. Like you said, coming over from PFL is different than someone who's coming up from, LFA in their 30s. Like, he was in a major organization, he had a lot of success in that major organization, and a lot of people, myself included, thought that it would transfer over to the UFC. Now, this fight against Prachnio, it should bring a little bit more aggressiveness out of him, because if Prachnio's anything, it's a guy who will be there to be hit. And that's sort of the weird thing about Prachnio, too, and why it will be very surprising for me if he is able to get on a 3-fight winning streak, because those first 3 fights in the UFC were awful. And yes, he does strike like a karate striker, but he doesn't have the footwork to go along with it. And that really is frustrating, because when guys get into that boxing range, which is what Felipe Lins can do, they really can damage Prachnio. And he has a decent L-step to get out of range initially, but he's not great at keeping guys off of him for a very long period of time, unless they get really tired as the fight goes on. Because, for instance, the Khalil Roundtree fight, Khalil's beating the brakes off until minute 6. And then once Khalil starts to get tired and he's not able to get to him and land those power shots, that's when Prachnio is able to pitter-patter his way to a win. But that was a very, very close fight. And for Prachnio, the win over Ike Villanueva, I know we're going to talk about Ike Villanueva. I don't want to bury the lead just
He's
yet.
also on this card.
He is also on this card. He's 16-13, though, and he hasn't looked great in a very long time. So that one for Prachnio, I don't put a ton of stock into. I just think this is one of those do-or-die fights for both guys, even though I do agree with you. They are trending in opposite directions, but I still feel like Prachnio needs this win just as bad as Lins does.
Old 18-13 Ike Villanueva. But yeah, when you look at this fight, the thing for me when I was watching the tape on Marcin Prachnio, it's not even that it's an L step, but he does do something like that. It's more of a C. Because he kind of tucks all the way around and it takes a little bit more time. And then he keeps his head kind of right here where it's very easy to hit him when he's doing it. So listen, many have tried. Some have been successful. And many have been successful in the UFC. 2-5 for Prachnio. The odds on this one, Prachnio open to -150. -128 right now in best fight odds. For Lins open to +130. +104. So it's coming together. So that community would say on Felipe Lins. If we have a look over on Tapology, surprise to us it is to you. I'm eager to see this one. I'm going to say over under 65% Prachnio.
I'll say under.
I'm going to say under. It's over 442 total votes, 83% Prachnio, 52% by decision, 42% by knockout. For the 17% that have Lins, 42% by decision, 50% by knockout. For Felipe Lins, I have to say this. When he won the $1 million at the PFL, that was 2018. He missed all of 2019 due to injury, and then he came back, made the UFC debut in 2020. So he didn't get the sniff at the million the second time through. They booked him late in the season against Satoshi Ishii, Olympian, and that fight didn't happen. The wins that he had, Alex Nicholson, giant man, Jared Rosholt, one of the better wrestlers
Don't come at me with Jared Rosholt.
One of the better pure wrestlers that you're going to find at heavyweight. Kaio Alankar, who can kind of get it done every way, also got submitted by guillotine in the first minute of that fight. And Josh Copeland, who's just tough and a striker. And he was able to beat him in the fourth round of that fight. So, an interesting one if you do look at it for Felipe Lins. He can get it done in a lot of different ways. Hasn't got it done in a long ways. So, for me, Matt, it's the speed, it's the volume of Prachnio. I'm eager to see what Lins looks like here at light heavyweight, though.
I have zero confidence in Prachnio whatsoever to win a fight at the UFC level because I don't think he's very durable and I think he's very hittable. That's not a combination I love in my fighters, but I like how you left it off. I do worry about Felipe Lins at 205. Not that I haven't seen him make the weight before, but it's been years since he has had to make this weight class.
And now he's 36.
Exactly. So, even with Jakar close, I know he looked really good over the weekend, but he did miss weight. And for some guys, the time off, it's just been a long time since they had. I know he was able to make weight after, but he had initially weighed in above 156 pounds. And for a lot of fighters who are coming off a long layoff, it's not that they can't make the weight, they just haven't done it in a really long time. It's a very complicated process, so there can be a hiccup here or there. So let's say Felipe Lins isn't 100% of himself going into this fight, because the weight cut was a little bit tougher for him. Then I definitely like Prachnio more than I already do, so I agree with you. I got Prachnio.
Big time opportunity in the return for Felipe Lins. He's been off for a time. Taking on Marcin Prachnio, both of us going reluctantly with the Polish fighter. Prachnio to get the win. Let us know in the comments section below who you have in this fight, because the fans are going one way, the odds are going another way. It should be a big time one. And coming up on this card, Tanner Boser taking on Alexandr Romanov. Clay Guida taking on Claudio Poyes. And in the main event, Amanda Lemos, Jessica Andrade. Not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Big time fight coming up this weekend at flyweight. You heard that one right. This one will be at flyweight. You have the Mongolian murderer, the most aggressive nickname in MMA, Aoriqileng, taking on Kamchita Cameron Else. And when I look at this fight, it's kind of like a 1993 on WWF Monday Night Raw. You had a matchup. It was Mr. Perfect. It was Ric Flair. And ultimately, it was a perfect plex that landed. Mr. Perfect got to stay with Raw. And then he sent Bobby the Brain Heenan into a frenzy because Ric Flair lost and he had to go away. That's what this fight feels like. Because for Aoriqileng, as good as he's been or as entertaining as he's been in the UFC, had a fight of the night against Jeff Molina where he got dropped and he rallied and it was an amazing fight. And his last time out, he had a competitive fight against Cody Durden. Those are both losses on his record. You lose 3 in a row, it's probably see you later. Now, he does also have the odd benefit that it's flyweight because it's not the deepest of division. But remember, they don't like to keep many flyweights around long if they lose. And for Cameron Else, came in on short notice against Kyler Phillips. He's boys with anybody that trains in MMA, it seems. BMF Ranch, Syndicate MMA, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, has a win over Paddy Pimblett as well. But the craziest part about it for me is Cameron Else, at 30 years old, his last fight against Kyler Phillips was a year and a half ago. And then you factor in the fact that Cameron Else throughout his career has competed at bantamweight, featherweight, and lightweight. And yes, he does have one catchweight bout from back in 2014 at 130 pounds. He's never fought at flyweight. So I'm really eager to see what we can see out of Cameron Else, because this is a guy that, of his 10 wins, all of them by first round finish, and he is either the hammer, which is the majority of his fights, or he becomes the nail like he was in his last fight. But we all know Kyler Phillips, the Matrix, fights like he's in the Matrix, and he is a wild fighter. So that's kind of tough to tell what you're going to get out of a guy like Else in the UFC. But I'm really looking forward to this. And honestly, kind of a sidebar, I had this as like an alternate to Fight of the Night. If anything falls through, I think this one, it's just going to be a lot of fun because both of these guys really, really need the win.
Oh, without a doubt. And I'm glad how you set it up with Aoriqileng. He's kind of like Bradley Beal, putting up big numbers on a team that constantly loses, because he has had really good moments in both of his losses. You can't look at both those fights and say, wow, Aoriqileng got washed for a total of 30 minutes, because it's not the truth at all. And the good thing about his losses are that in hindsight, they do look a little bit better. Maybe not the Cody Durden one, but the Jeff Molina one for sure does. I think we all realize now just how talented of a fighter Jeff Molina is. So the fact that Aoriqileng was able to go in there, have a very high-paced fight of the night caliber fight with Jeff Molina, I do feel like okay, it's not a win, but it's one of those losses where you do gain a little bit of stock. And for Cameron Else, I vividly remember after he lost to Kyler Phillips being like, okay, he's like 29, who cares? He'll be back in there soon, right? And then we waited. And we waited, and we waited, and it's almost been 2 years, which has been the surprising thing, because, like you said, if you follow any MMA fighter on Instagram, you've probably seen Cameron Else in the background of one of their gym pictures, no matter what gym they train at. But it has been really frustrating, because I think that there was a world where he could have been a really fun, maybe not future ranked fighter, but he is well-rounded at least. He's got a good ground game, he has big power in his hands. Those are fighters that can at least start to stack together wins in the UFC, and I'm going to bring this up for Preston Parsons later too. A loss to Kyler Phillips does not dictate the future of your MMA career, and that's why I think this fight against Aoriqileng should be so much fun, because for Aoriqileng, he's a very active fighter, he's a very aggressive fighter, but he's there to be hit too, and he's also there to be taken down. So I do think Cameron Else is going to have a lot more success in this fight than he did in his last one, because the level of competition is so much better for an entry-level fight than it is just getting thrown to the wolves against a guy like Kyler Phillips.
That really is it. And so I mentioned it for Cameron Else. This will be his debut at flyweight, period. Not even just in the UFC, period, as a pro. But for Aoriqileng, the same thing can kind of be said. All of his competition was at bantamweight before he made it into the UFC. He makes it over, fights Jeff Molina, fights Cody Durden. He won the second round in that fight. He also got knocked down in the second round of the fight against Jeff Molina. The other thing for the Mongolian murderer, training at a fight ready for this camp. I saw a lot of them when I was doing my study for last week's Alateng Hae fight against Kevin Kroom, because you look at Alateng Hae-Lee's Instagram, there's Aoriqileng in just about every picture, there's Korean Zombie in some of them, you really like what you see, but from Aoriqileng, I think that's interesting. I love that gym with Santino DeFranco and Eddie Cha. I talk about them all the time. And obviously the Henry Cejudo influence with his pillows, and I'll always talk about the pillows. But again, for Cameron Else at Syndicate, we have some Syndicate fighters also on this card. Louis Cosce is another one of them. But realistically, kind of going down through the list, I mean, that Paddy Pimblett win was quite a long time ago for Else back in 2013. Pimblett was 4-0, and at the time, Else was 1-1. He won some, he lost some, then he went on a nice win streak. But I did the math. Out of the 10 wins, the combined opponent record 18-17, so it's not the highest level. But when we factor everything in, Matt, if you look at it for Else, he was supposed to have a fight last year against Aaron Phillips. That one fell through. And that UFC debut, he was replacing Bakary Dana on incredibly short notice. If you look at it for Aoriqileng, it has been an interesting road since he came into the UFC. Back at UFC 261 when he won that fight of the night a year ago or so. If we talk about the odds for this one, Aoriqileng opened a minus 160. He's now a minus 240. And if we look at it for Cameron Else, open a plus 140. He's a plus 193. So we have a look at the Tapology votes, and I'm not going to leave this one up to a guessing game. 514 total votes, 73% Aoriqileng, 27% Else, 60% have him to win by decision. The 73% of Aoriqileng voters, 76% have him to win by decision. So people are seeing this one go to decision. Aoriqileng finished pretty well everybody outside of the UFC. All of 10 Cameron Else wins are by first round finish. So it's going to decision, the fans say?
I would think so, personally. And I do like Aoriqileng in this fight, but this is the one thing I'm going to say is a bit of a red flag. I don't think he has one recognizable skill that he can constantly go back to have tons of success in this fight. Because whatever he's good at, Else is going to mirror a lot of that, especially with his own grappling and with his own hand speed. I do think Aoriqileng will be the more active fighter, though, and if he can avoid that big shot by the much bigger guy, and that is the big point I want to bring up, Cameron Else is going to hit harder. He's probably going to be a lot stronger, but there is kind of a seesaw effect to cutting a lot of weight in MMA, and it means you're going to get tired faster, and yeah, you might look good early, but again, that power bar is going to drain really fast, and I do worry about Cameron Else, who, like you said, has fought all the way up to 155 pounds, now he's cutting down to 125, in his 30s, so he is still relatively young, and especially in his career, so maybe the weight cut won't be an issue. He's going to show up, look like the biggest flyweight in the world, and look really good, but I do worry about the weight cut, and for that reason, I will pick Aoriqileng.
If this was at 135, I'd take Cameron Else. It's at 125, so I slightly take Aoriqileng. I like his output on the feet. It's absolutely insane. His striking defense is not very good. He gets hit by straight shots. His takedown defense is not that great.
Just a lot going on, though.
So when I watch this fight, it's kind of like, okay, it's that Estela Nunes fight against Sam Hughes. It's like, okay, well, Sam Hughes, she's going to win. She's going to take her down. I'm going to take Estela Nunes because of her striking. And then in that fight, it pretty much went to that plan. Estela got out to a good start, and then it started to tail off. But for me, I'm going to go with Aoriqileng. I think he's going to have that advantage with the output, and that's one of those things that this guy never goes away. So as the fight goes on, I see him picking up steam. So for me, and for both of us, going with Aoriqileng, but I can't wait to see Cameron Else back out there again. Let us know down below in the comments section who you have. Big time fights coming up this weekend, headlined by Lemos and Andrade. Keep locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. And welcome back to the UFC, to the former top prospect out of Australia. It's Tyson Pedro coming up this weekend, taking on Hurricane Ike Villanueva out of the 4-ounce Fight Club. He is a Houston guy through and through. It's been a bit of a tough run in the UFC, 1-4 so far. But if you consider it a good opportunity for both of these guys to really figure out just where they fit into this overall division. And for Tyson Pedro, I say a welcome back. He's been out since late, and this is December of 2018, the third round TKO loss to Shogun Rua. Yes, that really happened. And for Pedro, a torn ACL in that fight. So there's a great piece out there, came out about a month ago, and I want to give credit where it's due. ESPN's Sam Bruce detailing Pedro's road back from injuries. And it's not just injury. He tore his ACL. Then he tore his meniscus. Then they went to look at the meniscus, and then in training, he tears his ACL again, and then he had to get his meniscus worked on again. So he's had just a litany of knee injuries, and we could talk about all the different fighters who've overcome knee injuries and look better. Look at Cub Swanson when he fought Daniel Pineda.
Don't know if he looks better. He's just fighting worse fighters.
He picked up a big win. Look at John McDessie when he fought Ignacio Bahamondes. Or look at it in the opposite, where we've seen a lot of people just knee injuries completely derail careers. Greg Oden is probably the best example. Thiago Santos, but he's still got a win off of that bad ACL. But when it comes to this fight right here, for Tyson Pedro, it's more of a fear of the unknown, because again, at one point, this guy was one of the hottest prospects ever. Now, he picked up that big win over Paul Craig. He obliterated him in every aspect of that fight. Then he goes out there and fights Ilir Latifi and loses by decision and gets out-wrestled. Then he goes out and he fights Saperbeg Safarov and he beats him impressively. Then he goes out and fights Vince St. Preux and it looks like he's going to win. And then he doesn't and he gets key-locked. And it's just that weird straight arm lock. You rarely see those ever work, but OSP was able to get that one done. And then ultimately for Pedro, the last time out, the loss to Shogun Rua. But realistically it is, do you have a ton of confidence in betting on a future for a guy who hasn't fought since 2018?
This is what I will say. If it's 100% Tyson Pedro versus 100% Ike Villanueva, Tyson Pedro should be a minus 500 favorite. I truly do believe that, because that's how promising of a talent he was pre-injury, and even kind of pre-Shogun fight, because he was having a lot of success early on in that fight pre-injury. He hurt Shogun with a front kick up the middle. He's landed some really good combinations. Gets tired going for the finish, kind of similar to Yair Rodriguez versus Jeremy Stephens in their second fight, where Yair hits him with the body shot, goes for the finish, and it kind of lets Jeremy Stephens come back into the fight later on. Well, that's what happened to Tyson Pedro against Shogun. In the third round of that fight, Shogun is kind of teeing off on Pedro even before the knee injury. Then he gets hit by a big shot, and it was one of those weird stoppages. It was kind of like Cain Velasquez-Francis, wasn't it? Where he goes down, you don't know if it was from the shot or because of the knee, and then next thing you know, Shogun lands a couple strikes, the fight's over. Pedro's busted up, don't get me wrong, but he's holding his knee, can't really get up, and you're like, okay, there was more to that stoppage than just the punches that put him down. But I will say this about Pedro. One of the biggest light heavyweights you will ever see. This guy is huge for the weight class. Physically, I kind of compare him to almost like a Jimmy Crute, kind of Jamal Hill type. I would put him in that echelon of like, this is as big as you can be for the weight class until you do need to move up to heavyweight. But the injuries are a little bit concerning based off of how Tyson Pedro fights, because let's go back and really dissect what his fighting style is. He has good long-range weapons on the feet. He has a decent jab. He has good front kicks, like I said, to keep you away from him. He's not a great up-close fighter, though, with his striking, but luckily, once guys get close to him, his jiu-jitsu is absurd at this weight class, and he's really good at taking the back for a very big guy. I always go back to the Khalil Roundtree fight, because Roundtree's able to drop him with a huge shot on the feet. He jumps onto the ground with Tyson Pedro. An awful idea if you're fighting Tyson Pedro. Pedro immediately takes his back and chokes him out like it's nothing. And it's not just that he choked him out on the ground. He was able to do that while rocked against a decent high-level fighter. Not like Khalil Roundtree Jr. in 2017 was really wowing people, but still, that was a good quality win at the time. And that really made me believe that, okay, Pedro is going to go on to do some really good things. He had a great win over Paul Craig. But the Ilir Latifi fight was kind of a market adjustment, if you will. It was one of those cases where Pedro, big favorite going into a lot of his fights. Big favorite against Ilir Latifi. Latifi just put on one of those classic veteran performances, though, where he's like, okay, I'm going to hold my hands up very high, and I'm not going to let you take me down, and that's just going to be the whole entire fight. And for me, It's not that created a blueprint for how to beat Tyson Pedro, but I do think that the wrestling component is something he's going to have to work on to be able to get the fights down to the mat, because I think Pedro has okay striking. I'd probably give it like a 5 out of 10. It's going to be hard for him to win a lot of fights just on the feet, put it that way. I think he has a very good ground game, but I do worry about his natural wrestling to transition it into his ground game.
Yeah, because if you look at it, you go back to the fight that Pedro had against Killer Roundtree, really good trip takedown to get things to the mat. If you look at it against Paul Craig in that fight, the blitzes, the elbows, and the clinch. But the biggest thing that I have in the notes is 2 minutes left in the first round. Both guys look absolutely gassed. I mean, for Paul Craig, it's because he got his face beat in. But for Tyson Pedro, it's because he was beating Paul Craig's face in. And he's tired at that point. And then all of a sudden, throws a right cross. And Paul Craig ends up, he just gets into like head and arm position, and then Tyson Pedro goes from head and arm into a mounted crucifix and then just starts elbowing him, and you end up getting the finish. Ilir Latifi, like I said, completely out-wrestles him. The fight against poor Saperbeg Safarov.
Saperbeg shouldn't have been in there.
Poor Saperbeg. And then, again, against OSP, the thing was head kick and then a right cross after it and drops him. And then as they kind of like get back up, it was OSP getting position, getting that straight arm lock, which you rarely ever see, and then the Shogun injury. So since then, you've had Tyson Pedro actually switching things up. He's trained at City Kickboxing with Eugene Behrman. It's almost like he's followed along Alexander Volkanovski, because he's also training
pretty good guy to follow
at Freestyle Fighting Gym with Joe Lopez. So those two are both Volkanovski gyms. But the thing that I look at it, when you consider Tyson Pedro, slightly positive striking differential, whatever. For Ike Villanueva, the strike differential through 5 UFC fights is negative 3.56. It's 4.354 to 7.91 against, 37% strike defense. That's not that great. Main Street Boxing and Muay Thai as well for Ike Villanueva. So you're going to see Mike Jackson under that gym too. Crew Bob Perez, also 4 Ounce Fight Club. But Ike Villanueva just in the UFC, it hasn't really been there. I know coming in, he had the win over, who was it? Roger Narvaez and then Rashad Coulter. They were two former UFC fighters that he was able to get the wins over. But again, finished losses to Chase Sherman, Jordan Wright, Marcin Prachnio, and then back in October of last year against Nick Negamarianu in the first couple minutes. So it hasn't been a great run for Villanueva. Realistically, this is one of those ones where you get an 18-13 guy who's 38. Taking on a former top prospect who's fallen on hard times and big injuries. We're going to see what happens. So for Tyson Pedro, open to minus 450, now a minus 488 you want to call it? Is that where we're at? And if you look at it for Villanueva, open to plus 350, plus 339. So again, might have made a mistake myself. The Tapology votes, we're not going to make this one a surprise because 554 total votes. 93% Pedro, 72% by knockout. For the 7% that I have Villanueva, 71% by knockout. So realistically, I can understand that. I think Tyson Pedro is going to go out there and also get a win. And maybe not by knockout. I could see him going out there and knocking him down to then get the submission.
That's kind of how I expect this fight to go. It's nothing against like Villanueva. It's just at 38 years old, when you fight like he does, your durability is going to start to fade at a certain point. And yes, he was able to knock out Vinicius Moreira, but Vinicius Moreira did one thing in the UFC, and that was get knocked out. That's all he did. So for Ike, yes, that's a good win, but being 1-4 with your only win being over a guy who never won in the UFC doesn't necessarily prove that you're at this level. And for Pedro, yes, I worry about all the injuries. How could you not? But I do think that you have to look at him as a similar fighter as to who he was pre-injury, because that's all we can go off of right now. It has been legitimately years since he has been in the UFC, but I think Pedro will be able to get it done.
Shouts to Vinicius Moreira, a guy who won on Contender Series very early on. He's 1-6 since. Poor Vinicius
And his win isn't even in the UFC.
Nope. So, big time fight coming up this weekend. Both of us going with Australia's Tyson Pedro to get the win. Let us know down below in that comment section who you have. Big time card coming up. I'm looking forward to Boser taking on Romanov. That should be a great one in the main event. Lemos taking on Andrade. You're not going to want to miss. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. This weekend, Dwight Grant is looking to keep Sergey Khandozhko's winless streak going past 1,057 days. And for Sergey Khandozhko, you haven't seen him in a very long time. That first win was against a man with a hair sweater. It was Rostam Akhman. But realistically for him, he's looking to make Dominic Letty and Leon in the Fast and the Furious 1 and driving around trying to take things from that truck. No? That one didn't go well? You don't catch my reference? All right. Sergey Khandozhko is looking to make a return like Honda's Big Red Three-Wheeler. Oh, what? Now you kind of get it. Honda, why is that his nickname? I don't understand it. And if you go back to Fast and the Furious 1, they had those modded old Civics, like the nice curved ones. Like
way cooler than they had any business being.
Like a 1998. You still see them on the road today. It's a dependable car. And maybe Sergey Khandozhko is one of those guys, but realistically, I've got quite a bit to say about this fight. I can boil it down. I can make it really simple for you. I can do 2-3 minute videos like we used to way back in the day, but I'm going to make this more fun because you want some information to share with your friends. But for Sergey Khandozhko, really, really interesting guy making that UFC debut. There was some short notice aspect to it. Bartosz Fabinski was on the poster, and then realistically everything got replaced. He gets Rostam Akman, wins a unanimous decision. Akman was undefeated at the time. It was a little bit of fun. And then you go through, and he fights a guy after that who was 10-3 in the UFC and a legit threat at 155, but up at 170. Took on Rustam Khabulov and lost, and he got taken down on 4 of 12 attempts, but realistically, Khabulov was able to get 10 minutes and 35 seconds of control time. People forget how good Rustam Khabulov was.
Benson Henderson in the main event. It took that to end his win streak.
Rustam hasn't fought since he beat Sergey Khandozhko at 170. Like, Rustam Khabulov is one of those guys. So, realistically, I look at this fight. Sergey Khandozhko was a bit of a head-scratcher coming into the UFC. He still is one. He still is one. And Dwight Grant, yeah, he either knocks guys dead or he lulls people to sleep and has very, very boring fights. If you want to see one, go watch when he fought Zach Otto.
You're going to get where I'm going with this, Craig, but this is going to take a second. We live near Old Quebec, right? Very old city, very pretty place.
I was there very recently.
Okay, well, when we were in school, there was this trip that you could do with your school where you go and you see all the history and stuff. And what we did is, one of our activities was you go to one of these old barracks, you get to reload a musket. Dwight Grant fights like he has a musket in his hands. The bullet hole is huge if it ever lands through anything, but I don't know if you've ever loaded a musket. It takes 4.5 minutes. It takes so long to reload. That's Dwight Grant. The one shot is amazing, and if it lands, oh my goodness, it's gonna be like Dwayne Wade over Anderson Varejao, and they're gonna play that poster for years and years and years. Go back to the Carlo Pedersoli knockout. I was telling Craig how much I liked that knockout before we started filming. It is truly one of my favorite knockouts of all time because the timing is so perfect. You have a guy going for a head kick and the other guy ducks underneath it and throws an overhand at the perfect time. He flatlines Pedersoli with that one punch. But I'm not going to lie, I've kind of let myself get almost overexcited by that one performance, and even how Dwight Grant looks in some of his losses. I know we fed this horse until it's died about how good he looked against Daniel Rodriguez, but we also have to tell the other side of the story, and it's that, yeah, when he is throwing those one single shots, he looks really good. But what happens if he throws more than a single shot? He gets very tired in his fights. And Dwight Grant, to me, is almost like the striking version of Shamil Abdurakhimov at this stage of his career. Remember when the last time we broke down Abdurakhimov's fights? It was, hey, he's a really good wrestler, but at this age, I don't really know if he can be dedicated to a wrestling game plan that doesn't completely get rid of his cardio. I kind of look at Dwight Grant the same way. Yes, his one strikes are really nice here and there, but I don't think at this age he can put together enough combinations to really go out there and wow his opponents with his volume. Because if you look past the majority of his fights, you can stifle him, and not even with your own strikes. If you just make Dwight Grant think about the takedown, it kind of puts him in a defensive shell, similar to a Jake Ellenberger way back in the day against Rory McDonald. It's not that Rory McDonald's able to really wow Jake Ellenberger with what he did. He was just able to fake a lot, fake and feint, and it kept Ellenberger sort of guessing the whole entire fight. I think you can get Dwight Grant into one of those rhythms to where you almost make him question everything that he's got going on, and then he just doesn't throw anything as a result. So I do think with Dwight Grant, if Sergey can get on the inside of him and just start putting volume together, he should be able to win consistent rounds throughout this fight.
Yeah, Sergey Khandozhko, and I went back, he was a featured prelim in that fight against Rostam Akman. That was Gustafsson versus Smith as a main event, and in that one they mentioned he's a master of sport in hand-to-hand combat and karate. It's master of the sun. So really, master of hand-to-hand combat and karate. And it's kind of weird when you break it down after that, because if you look at where he's trained in the last couple weeks, it's Extreme Couture in the UFC PI. Then before that, Academy MMA in Minsk, Belarus. And apart from that, for Khandozhko, you just haven't seen a big enough sample size. So realistically, I know he's a good striker. And by that, I mean decent volume. But he can get backed up. But when he gets backed up, he's a decent counter striker. He has porous takedown defense, but Dwight Grant's not taking down many people at all. Yes, he took down Stefan Seklic. Yes, he took down Francisco Trinaldo. But apart from that, and I guess he took down Zach Otto as well. The weird thing for Dwight Grant on the volume side of things, he's lower than UFC average on output in terms of strikes landed per minute, but also strikes received. So that's a double-edged sword.
And I do think it is the threat of his power, too, because people realize that there is a consequence for standing in the pocket with someone like Dwight Grant.
But now you look at it. He took on Alan Jouban, beat him by split decision. I thought Dwight Grant won that fight.
Close one.
That's fair. Takes on Dana Rodriguez, knock him down, drag him out first round, but then he gets knocked out. Beats Stefan Seklic. A lot of people thought Stefan Seklic won that fight. And then he beat Francisco Trinaldo his last time out. That was in October of last year. I have the judges' scorecards. Adelaide Bird gave round 1 and round 2 to Trinaldo, and then scored the third round a 9-9 because there was a bit of an illegal eye poke in that one. D'Amato scored at round 1 and round 2 for Grant, and then 9-9 in the third.
You have two awful judges you're using
and
right now to defend your points.
Ron McCarthy scoring at round 1 and round 2 Trinaldo with a 9-9. And realistically, I had round 1 for Grant, round 2 for Trinaldo, round 3 is a 9-9, so it's a draw. But again, it was a weird fight. And Trinaldo, Masaran Duba, both of those guys in that fight were quite old, if we're really being honest.
And this is my problem with most Dwight Grant fights. It's very hard to point to any single round in any of his fights and say, wow, he definitively won that.
Unless he knocks somebody out.
Exactly. That's why I really do have a hard time thinking he's going to be able to win this fight. Because unless he's able to clip Khandozhko with a huge strike on... Let's say he is able to counter a kick similar to what he was able to do against Pedersoli. Pedersoli's not very durable, though. And he's been in a lot of crazy fights even before that. I just think Khandozhko, with his movement on the outside, is going to give Grant a lot of trouble. Because if you throw in combination, then yes, maybe you can get him to back straight up. And eventually, at the end of your combinations, you're going to be able to land 1 or 2 strikes. But with the way that Dwight Grant strikes, I think he's going to throw a 1-2. If it lands, it lands. If it doesn't, there's going to be a reset and then a massive period where there's going to be a lot of inactivity from him. That's where I think Sergey can take advantage of and start to win rounds that way.
Big time opportunity for both of these guys. We look at the odds. Dwight Grant open at a plus 165. He's a minus 104. For Khandozhko, the comeback open a minus 190. He's a minus 121. And if we have a look at the fan vote, this one will be a surprise to us. It is to you, Matt. I'm going to say over under 70% Dwight Grant because people know who he is.
I'll say under.
I'm going to say under. Oh, wow. 520 total votes, 74% Khandozhko, 83% by decision for the 26% that have Grant, 66% by decision, 30% by knockout. All of that is a surprise to me because, again, Khandozhko, decent counter striker, might not be the best game plan against Dwight Grant. However, he actually does have pretty good volume. I like the little bits and flashes I've seen out of that karate background. When it comes to the wrestling, I'll cancel them out. Dwight Grant's bounced around at some really good gyms in California. I know I put it up on the picture, Alliance, but he's been at AK, he's been at Alliance, he's been at some of the big names. So I do have Khandozhko in this fight, which might come as a surprise to a lot of people. I can see people in the comments section definitely siding with Dwight Grant because you've seen a lot more of him. But for me in this one, I'm going with Honda. It's a dependable engine.
I agree. If Dwight Grant won by first round knockout, I don't think either one of us would be very surprised. It's just, if you look at the likelihood of that happening, and the thing about Grant too is, if he hurts his opponent in the first round, do you really think he's going to flurry on them immediately after to get them out of there? Maybe he will, but even if he does, that might almost be a negative for him, because then he will be a lesser version of himself later on. So I do like Khandozhko in this fight, but I think this will be an entertaining matchup.
I wonder what Larry and Tyson would make of this matchup. But both of us going once again with not the enticer, it's Honda, Sergey Khandozhko, to get the win. Some big time fights coming up on this card. Couple of Canadians in action. Tanner Boser, Charles Jourdain, and Marc-Andre Barriault. Big time opportunity for those guys. You're going to want to keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Coming up this weekend at a special catchweight of 190 pounds, we have Jordan Wright taking on the Canadian out of Gatineau, Quebec. It is Marc-Andre Barriault representing Sanford MMA against Dynamics MMA's own, the Beverly Hills Ninja. And in this matchup, there's a lot of different things we could talk about. I could give the UFC another tagline. Do you folks want it? I know you want it. It's kind of like hammers and nails getting into a fight. It's like a fight in the parking lot of a Home Depot. Because realistically, for Marc-Andre Barriault, you look at it when he came into the UFC, it was all, well, he was the nail. He was the nail. And then he fought Oscar Piota, and he wasn't the nail anymore. But you know what? USADA, They said you're still kind of the nail. We're taking that one away from you. So that's the no contest on Barriault's record. He did look very good in...
Not a great sign when USADA sees you win a single fight and they're like, something's going wrong here.
Well, that ends up as a no contest. He beats Abu Zaitsar. He's able to just kind of rally back in that fight after a strong first round from Zaitsar. Beats Dolce Lunjambula in a grimy type of Barriault fight. And then his last time out against Chitty Bang Bang and Joe Kawani, that wasn't that long ago, he gets finished. Now, that fight was 2 months, a week, and a day ago. Well, at least when they stepped foot into the cage. And for Jordan Wright, his last time out was equally as unimpressive 3 months and 3 weeks ago against Bruno Silva, where, hey, Jordan landed a couple good shots, right? No, he did.
He ate a couple big ones, though, too.
And then, yeah, he eats a couple big ones. And for Jordan Wright, it's like car crash fighting. He's great at distance, but he always wants to crash it. And sometimes he knocks guys out. And sometimes he gets knocked out. And when he gets knocked out, it's kind of wild to watch it because it's not that his chin's that bad, but he is very susceptible to getting hit by major power shots by power punchers easily and often in the UFC. So for Wright, the craziest part about it is, and I'll throw his UFC stat line up there because it's just a wild thing to look at numerically. Like, it's crazy. But since Dana White's Contender Series in 2018, he loses to Fluffy Hernandez, gets knocked out in 40 seconds. So that ends up a no contest. The dank herb on Hernandez's part. Hernandez gets into the UFC. Wright goes on and fights Gabriel Checo over at LFA. Now, Checo, he's known as a jiu-jitsu ace. Recently lost to Rashad Evans in a fight that really happened with Eagles FC. But in that fight, Mr. Jordan Wright's able to get the win in the second round. So then he books a ticket on short notice against Ike Villanueva. And he finishes him in the first round. And that's good. And then he fights Joaquin Buckley and he gets knocked out. Then he fights Jamie Pickett, knocks him out. And then he goes out there and he fights Bruno Silva and gets knocked out. So, just kind of wild to see that. Originally this weekend, it was supposed to be Jordan Wright against Roman Kopylov. Kopylov out. In steps Marc-Andre Barriault. Matt, we know how to Wright. Very, very light on his feet. Bounces quite a bit. Keeps his hands right here. Keeps his head wide up and high.
I have a whole theory that Luke Rockhold kind of started, and it's that you should never spar people shorter than you. Because I really do think it gives you a really bad defensive mindset. Because when you're a lot taller than everyone you're sparring, and I do believe Jordan Wright has this problem because he fights exactly in this manner. You lean back a lot. Because when you're taller than people, you can get away from punches by just leaning back. And it's fine. It's really good to do in training. Then you get into actual MMA, and you don't really have that luxury anymore. You will be fighting people who are your size, who are throwing in combination, who maybe you can evade those first couple shots, but if you just move your head backwards and you don't follow with your feet, and your opponent follows you with their feet, well, they're going to get closer to you, and they're going to be able to land those power shots. And that's exactly how Jordan Wright's been clipped in his last two fights. Bruno Silva, close to the distance. Jordan Wright moves his head initially, doesn't move his feet at all, gets caught up against the cage, ends up eating... Like you said, he might not have a bad chin. He just finds himself eating power punches from guys you do not want to eat power punches from him. Going into this video, it was a big thing on my mind. Okay, Marc-Andre Barriault, he just got knocked out. But the truth is, Jordan Wright also recently got knocked out too. So I'm not really sure where either guy's durability is going to be coming into this fight. And I really do think that has to be said. Because anytime you have two guys coming off of, let's be honest, fairly vicious knockouts in both cases, I like it when a fighter has 5 months, 6 months, 7 months to really let their brain heal, and then you can think to yourself, okay, their chin will have some time to come back, and let's be honest, normally when fighters get knocked out, they're never really the same afterwards. It's kind of, the way it was described to me, Alistair Overeem was the first person who ever said this. It's like when you open a jar. The first time you open a jar, it's really, really hard. And then it gets easier every single time you do it. When you get knocked out in MMA, it's the same thing with your chin. It's really hard the first time, then it becomes easier and easier and easier. And I do worry with Jordan Wright and his fighting style. If someone's coming to collect those debts a little bit early, I really do worry about his overall style, because even in his wins, it's not like he's winning clean fights left, right, and center where he's not getting hit. He is still very susceptible to damage no matter what the result of his fight is, and I really do think that Jordan Wright needs to overhaul his fighting style, because I agree with you. I think there are some huge positives in his fighting style. He's a good fighter at distance. He has a good jab when he sticks to it, which isn't very often if we're being honest. He has great power on the feet, and he's a huge light heavyweight for this division, or he's a huge middleweight fighting at 190 this weekend in a catchweight. So I do think that there are some positives to his game, but I just think the recklessness that he has completely takes away any advantage he brings into the cage. And for Marc-Andre Barriault, I know I don't love the knockout he had to Chidi and Jokawani, and if you've been watching Bellator, I think you know how good Chidi is as a natural striker, but at least Barriault, other than that one knockout loss, he's not taking consistent beatings every single time he's out there, and that's why I do think he's the slightly more durable guy going into this matchup.
Marc-Andre Barriault has a lot of wild fights, though, and he gets hit. I know neither one of these guys, like, again, stats on a page, but neither one of these guys have good stat lines when it comes to their striking defense. And for Barriault, usually has to keep his hands up, eat a lot of damage to get into a clinch, and then land his knees and land his close shots on the inside. And the craziest thing that Matt said is, the way that it was described to me as, Alistair Overeem said, what'd you guys do? Sit down in a room and throw around ideas?
He was talking to, I don't remember if it was Luke Thomas or Errol Hawani, but he was just describing how hard it is to come back from a knockout.
Like Santa Claus, you sat on his lap. Alistair, tell me
I would
about
love to talk to
jars.
Alistair Overeem. A plethora of MMA knowledge.
Was horse meat a real thing, Alistair? Tell me, please.
I think there was some other supplements involved.
But when it comes down to this fight, again, for Barriault, you might not think of him as a guy who is able to get a lot of takedowns, is able to put his body on you. That's the way that he fights. He doesn't get a ton of takedowns, but it is that clinch and cage control. It is that pressure. It's somewhat limited boxing, because it is a boxing pressure-heavy style. Doesn't throw a ton of kicks. For a guy like Jourdain Wright, who has this wind-up type of almost taekwondo style, Anthony Hardok and Vladimir Matyashenko are his coaches, so you'd think, hey, the wrestling's probably pretty damn good with the janitor, and the kickboxing's pretty damn good with Hardok. There's pieces there. The takedown defense has been good so far, but I honestly do have a really hard time, everybody. I opened this video by saying, hey, I'm honest if it's a bad week, I'm honest if it's a good week, and I'm going to be honest, this isn't the greatest card. I'm going to be honest on this one. I don't have a great read either way on the picks, so
I think it'll be a fun fight, though. Like, I agree with you. I don't have a good read on this, because both guys could get knocked out, both guys could lose by decision. I still think it's going to be an entertaining fight, though, at the end of the night.
Jourdain Wright opened a minus 140 favorite, he's minus 150. Marc-Andre Barriault opened a plus 110. Lui maintenant, plus 120. If we have a look at the votes with Tapology, Matt, surprise to us, there to you. I'm going to say over-under because Wright's a favorite, 62.5%. Right?
I'll say under.
I'm going to say under. Ooh, it's close. 369 total votes, 60% Wright, 82% have him to win by knockout. For the 40% that Barriault, 42% by decision, 50% by knockout. That slim 8% margin have Barriault to win by submission. Smat, now I put you on the spot. What's the pick here?
This is a I'm going to look dumb no matter what I say type of prediction, because I'm either going to say Marc-Andre Barriault is going to completely one-sided win a decision against Jourdain Wright, and he could win like a 30-26 and really grind him out. But I do think Jourdain Wright's going to win this fight. I do think his size is going to make it really hard for Marc-Andre Barriault to take him down, and he is a very physically strong guy at this weight class. He does have good takedown defense. As long as he doesn't get into a brawl with a really heavy-handed puncher, I do think those 50-50 exchanges on the feet are ever so slightly going to favor Jourdain Wright. But I will say this. I think Wright's the better striker, but I do think Barriault's slightly more durable. So maybe if Barriault can land some big hook on the feet, he's able to rock Wright and then start to implement his own wrestling and his game plan from that point on. But my prediction will be Jourdain Wright.
The scary thing is, for Marc-Andre Barriault, the knockout loss to Chidi and Joe Kawani was so recent, and it does scare you that A, it was recent, but B, he's taking this on short notice, so you got to cut weight. You could still be compromised. There's a lot of things at play there. Obviously, that 5 pounds will help him. The other thing, for Jourdain Wright, he's seen the second round twice in his life. Against Gabriel Checo, who is not a striker, he's a grappler, and against Joaquin Buckley, where Wright got knocked out. So I'm going to go with Marc-Andre Barriault with the pressure. The thing that I hate is the fact that when Jourdain Wright gets backed up against the cage, being the taller guy, always gets his hands down for his underhooks, and again, leaves his damn head right there to be hit by uppercuts, elbows, anything that Barriault has coming his way. So I favor Marc-Andre Barriault in a lot of different aspects in this fight. Obviously, I like the long-range weapons, the blitzes as well at a Jourdain Wright, but it's not going to be a heck of a fight if we disagree on the pick like this. You know it's going to be a heck of a fight. So, both of us in disagreement. I'm going with Canada's Marc-Andre Barriault. I never say that. You're going to go with the man out of California, the Beverly Hills Ninja, and Jourdain Wright. Let us know down below in the comments section who you have in this fight. We're really eager to hear from you. We do our best to try and get back to a lot of you guys in the comments section. Big time fights coming up this weekend. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Couple of welterweight finishers looking to carbonate their UFC careers and get things going with a win streak, because listen, let's be completely honest. For Preston Parsons, the nickname is Pressure. For Louis Cosce, it used to be the Monster. And what I can tell you is They came out in their debuts. For Cosce, it wasn't too bad. But the reason they want to carbonate it is because right now, they came out flat like a bottle of Diet Pepsi rolling around the floorboards of an old Chevy S10. Matt, you care to comment on that one? What? That is exactly the way that it goes. But when it comes down to this one, Matt, for Preston Parsons, 9-2 is the overall record. 9 wins by submission, and he is a guy that can get it done in a lot of different ways. Now, I say that because for Parsons, he is the owner, the operator of Elevate MMA. You'll see him representing that gym this weekend. A lot of big-time training partners have come through those doors, getting Parsons ready for this fight. I've seen Austin Lane there, you know, the guy that fought Greg Hardy at one point, but also Joaquin Buckley's at the gym. So pretty good guy, especially to get ready for the pressure and the striking of Louis Cosce. But for Parsons, the biggest thing and takeaway that I got before he made his super short notice debut against Daniel Rodriguez is that, okay, 9 wins, 9 of them by submission. That's great. Kind of like Maeda Buena Silva. You look at it, and other than the couple of decision wins, everything's by submission. But she's a Muay Thai artist. For Preston Parsons, everything's by submission. But he started to add components to his game. His boxing's got noticeably better from when he came in to where he is now. And his leg kicks as well. When you take on a great striker, a rank guy in Daniel Rodriguez, who outstruck, like, Kevin Lee and Gabe Green.
Kevin Lee got outstruck by Diego Sanchez 2 months ago.
No, he didn't.
He did, though. He kind of got lit up.
Not that great. But for Preston Parsons, I do like what I saw. And again, came in on super short notice for Abubakar Nurmagomedov taking on Daniel Rodriguez. For Louis Cosce, though, did a lot of background research because I mentioned at the top of this show, Louis Cosce has been out for a very, very long time. His debut was against Sasha Palatnikov. It was a fight of the night where he was able to just pour the pressure on Palatnikov in the first round, and then he didn't really have much left in the second round, and then in the third round, Palatnikov was able to get the win. But that fight for Cosce was, and I want to get specific here, a year and 4 months ago. So I had to go back and I had to go, okay, well, has Cosce had any interviews that have come out recently? Yeah, a few of them. So one with friend of the show, Ryan Jarrell, one with Alex Bahoon, and over at Cage Side Press. And with Ryan Jarrell, he said, 2 torn labrums, 1 in each shoulder, due to training in the years.
Paul George.
Well, now he's in the UFC, so, you know, you get to take advantage of the healthcare and the PI and all that. And that's the big thing for Cosce. So I parlayed that to the second interview with Cage Side Press. And Louis said, well, you know, I got the surgery on the labrums. We got that in check. Then I went to Vegas to the PI, and I was getting work done there with Heather. You see Heather in some of those videos. And then Sasha Palatnikov's there, and it's like, hey, let's chalk it up. Let's have a bit of a conversation. Sasha goes, hey, are you here for long? You got a gym to train at? And Louis goes, no. Sasha goes, well, come to Syndicate. And Louis goes, I'll think about it. And then he goes to Syndicate, and then he hooks up with John Wood that way. So a good opportunity for Louis Cosce here, now training out of Syndicate MMA with a litany of training partners that you know and love. So a big opportunity for him on the comeback. But it's an odd stylistic matchup between these two guys.
Louis Cosce to me, remember when we talked about William Knight after he weighed in at 251, being like, okay, he's playing the extremes game. When you weigh in at that much, it's like, okay, your punching power might be accentuated, but your cardio is going to be a lot worse too. Louis Cosce fights like a welterweight version of that fighter, to where he's extremely aggressive. He is always trying to put you down, either with his takedowns or with his punching power. But there's no stop to it, and that really is... It's good, don't get me wrong, but at the UFC level, if you don't have absurd cardio like Max Holloway to go along with that output, you're going to be punching yourself into exhaustion all the time. And we talk about this a lot with primary wrestlers, about how, you know, some guy will go for 11 takedowns, he won't get any of them, be kind of a sitting duck, and then we never really know what to look at. For Louis Cosce, you like some of the skills that he has shown, but in the one time that we do have a lot of tape on him, it's the Sasha Palatnikov fight. Where's Sasha Palatnikov right now?
Ex-MMA.
Thank you. Sasha Palatnikov is not a top-tier UFC fighter. Let's just call it that much. And he looked good early on in that fight, but there's so many holes with Louis Cosce's style. He's someone who, with his aggressiveness, will get himself tired, will leave holes in his own striking defense, and his hands come down a lot as the fight goes on, to where his aggression's great, but it does really bite him in that second and third round.
Now, there's a huge counter to what you just said. We've only seen that one time.
But that's the thing.
Every other fight, 7-1, all 7 of the wins, he's dusted guys in the first round very, very quickly.
And this is my point. It's kind of like Shane Carwin. Shane Carwin knocked everybody out in the first round, and everybody loved him. But the second we saw him go past the first round, we figured out what his Achilles heel was. I worry with Cosce, he's going to have a very similar trajectory. And I'm glad you called me out on that, because I should refine that point a little bit. I do worry about Cosce and the fact that he is a bit of a front runner, because yes, in all those fights where he wins by first round knockout, first round guillotine choke, for instance, he looks incredibly dominant. But the one time that we've seen him push past his limits, he does start to fall apart as the fight goes on because his pressure is not sustainable for 15 minutes.
Yeah, and the craziest part for Cosce, you look at it, he beats a couple of Travises, you know, Caval and then Travis LeBron, and that's pretty good. And then you look at it, he beats Sir Gregory McCowan, and then he fights Danny McWilliams, and that's where I have to stop. Because for Danny McWilliams,
great name.
Oh, McWilliams, he at the time had a bit of a salty record at 18-42, but at the time, he had already fought a couple of brothers. He had fought Leon and Edmund Shabazian. He had lost those fights. Then he fights Louis Cosce. Then he fights Orion Cosce. So Danny McWilliams, loser to brothers. That's what Danny is. You look at it, he beats Bill Smallwood, who had a 4-8 record. He beats Art Hernandez, who was 4-4, and then beats Victor Reina over on Contender Series in 2020. And a few months later, he takes on Sasha Palatnikov. He was actually an underdog against Reina in that one. Against Palatnikov, he was a -600 favorite in that fight of the night. Nearly did finish it, though, in the first round. For Preston Parsons, again, the craziest part about him being such a submission ace and gaining in his striking is that he started off as a very, very young man in MMA. He was 19 years old when he got knocked out by Mike Perry. He was 20 years old when he beat Ignacio Bahamondes, who was 18, by first round armbar with Titan FC. So very, very young in the game. A little bit of time off between some of the fights. Same issue, though, for Parsons that you're going to find with a lot of regional talent, just like Louis Cosce had, is again, you fought Mike Perry, you lost. You beat Ignacio Bahamondes very early on in his career. But then after that, on the win streak coming into the UFC, 5-2 Wesley Barnes, 10-4 Socrates Pierre that you'll hear of on regional records, wins or losses. Wesley Golden, who was 8-16, and then 10-7 Jeff Peterson, where Parsons was able to actually show off full arsenal in that one. So the odds for this fight have Louis Cosce open to -175. He's -171 right now. Parsons open to +145. He's +141. If we have a look at the Tapology votes, surprise test there to you, I'm going to say over under 75% Louis Cosce.
I think he will be the favorite, but I'll say under 75.
Ooh, right on 75. 543 total votes. 75% Cosce, 76% by knockout. For the 25% that have Parsons, 52% by submission. So I'm surprised that 48% think Preston Parsons is going to win by another method of victory, but that's beside the point. Matt, what are you saying here?
I don't love the pick either way, if I'm being completely honest, and I am going to say this, and I don't often say it. The winner of this fight only guarantees themselves one more fight in the UFC. That's it. The winner's not going to go on to have a 4, 5, 6 win streak because Cosce and Parsons might have good strengths to their games, but they also have a ton of weaknesses, and that's the problem at the UFC level. We don't just look at what you do very well, we also have to look at the things that you do poorly, and if you do a lot of things poorly, top-tier fighters at the world-class level are going to figure out what the holes are in your game, and they're going to exploit them. And when I look at Preston Parsons and Louis Cosce, I look at two guys who do have quite a bit of weaknesses in their MMA games. Ever so slightly, I'm going to pick Louis Cosce. I think he will be able to defend the takedown. I think his aggressiveness on the feet will at least be able to replicate some of the success Daniel Rodriguez is able to have early against Preston Parsons. But again, D-Rod is so much better than both these fighters. It is really hard to take anything from that fight because, like you said, you can put in ranked fighters against Daniel Rodriguez on short notice. They might win, they might lose, but it's going to be a tough fight no matter who they are. Then you're just throwing in a guy on short notice who probably didn't really deserve the opportunity to begin with. Of course, he's not going to look good against someone like D-Rod, so temper your expectations for Parsons. I'm sure he's not going to look that bad in this performance, but I do think Cosce's physicality will be able to keep this on the feet to where he can show some of his strengths.
Cosce's one of those guys, there is some wrestling in his back pocket, but that would be a negative when you take on Preston Parsons, and yeah, I mean, ever so slightly, myself included, I have Louis Cosce. Now, could I see Cosce strike himself into a clinch, Parsons then going like Yulia Stoliarenko, grabbing onto him, pulling him to the mat, and then submitting him?
Of course.
Yeah, that's exactly how I see Preston Parsons winning. So there definitely is an avenue to victory for Parsons. I mentioned it, training with Joaquin Buckley, who fights a little bit more like Louis Cosce than a lot of people would imagine. So for me, I do have Cosce in this one. Love the camp change. Love the fact that he got those shoulders cleaned up when he needed to with the UFC. So really eager to see both these guys coming out strong and hopefully not flat diet Pepsi in an old S10 floating around the floorboards. Both of us going with Louis Cosce to get the win. Let us know down below in the comment section who you have in this fight and the many more on this card. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. This fight straight up should be the main event, the co-main event, all of the poster. It's like the part in Behind Blue Eyes where you're feeling kind of sad because everything's sad and then all of a sudden the skies open up. It gets real. We have Charles Jourdain representing Bate, Quebec, Canada. This is your guy. You also have Gatineau, Quebec, Canada's own Marc-Andre Barriault on this card. And you have the man himself, Tanner Boser as well. Canada represent. Maybe it'll be a three-peat. Ontario let us down last weekend because, listen, TJ Laramie and Jesse Ronson weren't able to get the wins. However, when I look at this fight, Matt, for Charles Jourdain, the guy is a striking dynamo. He's also 3-3 with a draw. See, I almost said no contest, but a draw in the UFC. And for Lando Vannata, he's 4-5 with 2 draws in the UFC. But that's not the whole story. Like, for Jourdain, has a wild fight where he knocks out the hometown guy in Busan, Korea against Doo Ho Choi. You know, the guy that's now in the UFC Hall of Fame, the fight wing, against Cub Swanson. Well, Charles Jourdain went over that way. And he beat him, and he looked amazing. But we've had ups, we've had downs, we have highs, we have lows. We have draws against Joshua Culibao. And then we have what happened in Charles Jourdain's last fight, where he took on Andre Ewell, kicked him in the leg, and at the end of that fight, he didn't finish him, but he had an awful crazy finishing sequence of a kick to the body. And for groovy Lando Vannata, I was surprised he moved down to featherweight in his last fight, to be completely honest with you, because he did, and he was a lifelong guy at lightweight. I know he had a fight at welterweight at one point early in his career, but he took on Mike Grundy at featherweight, and in that fight, he gets the win. It is by split decision. The judges' scorecards, if you will, Craig, I'm glad you asked for them. Chris Lee scored the contest, 29-28, Vannata. Marcos Rosales scored the fight, 30-27, Vannata. Patrick Patlan scored the fight, 30-27, Mike Grundy. I'm going to throw the picture up there on the screen. That's how many major organizational fights Patrick Patlan's been able to hand in a judge's decision. Not a many of them, and Strikeforce included in the very few select ones that are there. So it was a big head scratcher to me that Mike Grundy was able to win like that. Like, you know, maybe 29-28, 30-27 Vannata, possibly, but 30-27 Grundy was a huge head scratcher, considering his takedowns weren't all that effective, and his striking was mostly moot.
I gotta be honest, the right guy won, so I really don't care that much. I understand the judge made a really, really bad decision, but the right guy ended up winning, so I'm not gonna really get caught up on that one judge's bad decision.
Now, my big question is, though, Matt, again, for Lando Vannata, I brought it up, 4-5 with 2 draws in the UFC. Obviously, we remember him for the crazy knockout against John McDessie, the wild fight that he had against Tony Ferguson. But for Lando Vannata, it's kind of been a mixed bag lately. I know the 5-on-in, you look at it, 3 years ago, fights Marcos Mariano. We're going to talk about Marcos Mariano on this card. He also fought Claudio Poyas. Those are his 2 losses when he was in the UFC. Came in at 6-4, left as 6-6, Anderson Silva's protege. He beats Mark Chikasi. He loses to Mark Chikasi, beats Yancy Medeiros, loses to Bobby Green, and then beats Mike Grundy. For Lando Vannata, it's kind of weird. 30 years old. We kind of haven't seen giant leaps and bounds in his progression. He's very much a wrestler at heart, but he loves to strike.
Exact. I think it's the opposite way, though. I really do think he's a striker who now has become a wrestler, because Lando Vannata fights in a much more safe way than he ever did when he first came into the UFC.
D1 experience at the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga.
But my point is he is an MMA striker who chooses to wrestle, though, in the majority of his fights. But I would say in his last 5 fights, he has gone back to that wrestling a lot more.
For one semester. So that you can't really argue. Well, he did wrestle D1 for a semester. But yeah, I agree with you in that one. Like with Lando Vannata, I agree with it in the way that he came in with the wild striking. He started to rely on the wrestling. Sometimes defensively, his wrestling's not all that great, though. Like, that's one of those things. And sometimes you can get caught up kind of doing the same thing over and over and over again in some of his fights.
Because he's been in a lot of crazy fights. And when you've eaten the amount of damage that Lando Vannata has in what is it, 16 UFC or 16 MMA fights? Like, he hasn't been in that many fights, and he's eaten an absurd amount of damage throughout his career. And I do think that as a result of all that damage that he has taken earlier on in his career, he is fighting in a more safe manner. Like, yes, that Tony Ferguson fight was crazy. So was the David Tamor fight, too, at UFC 209. That was a fight of the night that not a lot of people remember, but that was a back-and-forth brawl. And Vannata has found himself in a lot of those fight-of-the-night style fights. And I do agree with what you said about him moving down to 145 was a little questionable. I know physically he looked really good on the scale. He looked jacked up. I didn't think that was his best performance, though, by any means against Mike Grundy. And yes, you can get into the scorecards about how they were a little weird. Lando Vannata just didn't really look like the active version of himself that we had kind of known and loved before that. Because, like, losing a decision to Bobby Green at lightweight doesn't really mean it's the end of the road for you. And the fact that he saw that as like, okay, I need to make this massive change in my career to now go down in weight. We're going to learn a lot more about Vannata in this matchup against Charles Jourdain, because against Grundy you have another guy who's a wrestler, so he will counter that part of your game, at least for the most part. And on the feet, Vannata is a much cleaner striker than Mike Grundy. But in this fight, I think Jourdain is the crisper striker on the outside, and I think Jourdain is more willing to get into a firefight. Now, that could be a good thing, that could be a bad thing. Early on in Lando's career, I think that'd be a bad thing for Jourdain. I think groovy Lando would be able to sort of read his counters, find the holes in his wildness in his game, and crack him with a few really nice shots down the middle. I don't know if this version of Lando can do that to Charles Jourdain, though, because now, instead of Vannata looking for counters to where he can strike on the in-betweens, he's looking to change levels a lot. And against someone like Jourdain, if he gets that first takedown, then maybe that will be the best game plan for him. But if he can't get that first takedown, and if he is expending a lot of his energy going for the takedowns and not really being defensively sound on the feet, Jourdain doesn't really get tired as fights go on, other than that one time that he did. So I do think that Charles Jourdain can pick up a lot as this fight goes on. I think early on, these guys' power will be very similar, but I do think as round 2 and 3 comes on, the leg kicks and body kicks of Jourdain really are going to accumulate on Vannata.
Now I need a can of the blue stuff from the fridge that is off screen to our left as Matt clangs everything that's in there, but realistically, when I look at this fight, Lando Vannata used to have a mop of hair, used to have a beard. I don't know if anybody's checked out either of these guys' Instagram's games. For Charles Jourdain, still at Brazilian Top Team Canada. For Lando Vannata, still at Jackson Wink. And none of that has changed. Jourdain hasn't really even spent much time in the States training since he's joined the UFC. And for Groovy Lando, the thing that I've noticed is shaved head. He's rocking a dad goatee, and I'm just wondering if he's just going to hang out, he's going to grab a can of Bud Light, crush it, and open up a can of whoop ass on Charles Jourdain. Like, we'll see what happens. I'm not going to stone cold this one. But when I do focus on this fight, Matt, the weird thing is, with a guy taking a more safe approach to his fights with Lando Vannata, more ramping up his technical boxing, working in some of those takedowns, the thing for Charles Jourdain is, I don't know, I mean, yeah, okay, what does he do great? His boxing, his odd long-range weapons, there's snap at the end of his jab, there's snap at the end of his hooks. When he throws that right hook out there, he does great damage. And his left body kick, it's like Gabriel Benitez. These guys are on the level. Charles Jourdain, when he whips that kick out there, it's wild. Now, he switches stances. The thing you don't like to see, especially for the judges, when guys come at Charles Jourdain, he has great striking defense. Like, it actually is top tier in this division. But the craziest thing is, he shells up. Not a lot gets through, but he does shell up, and a lot of volume can go his way. So you don't necessarily love to see that. His Achilles heel is his takedown defense, though, and that's the most interesting part of this fight, because Charles Jourdain doesn't have the greatest takedown defense. Lando Vannata has pretty good wrestling, but Charles Jourdain is the much superior and crisper striker to Lando Vannata. So that's what makes this one so much fun. So odds for this one, Jourdain open to minus 120s and minus 139 on best fight odds. For Vannata, open to plus 110, plus 113. We have a look at Tapology. Surprise to us as it is to you. So we're going to have a look at that vote. I'm going to say over under 67.5% for Air Jourdain.
I'll say over.
I'm going to say over, slightly over. 557 total votes, 70% Jourdain, 82% by decision. For the 30% that have Vannata, 85% by decision. So a lot of people seeing this one going to a decision, Matt. What are you saying on this fight?
Jourdain reminds me a lot of a younger Lando Vannata, if we are being completely honest. They both have that weird explosiveness to their game. They have that kind of weird hitch to it where nothing they do looks normal, but it is very effective. The difference, though, is Vannata has changed his fighting style at this stage of his career, and I do think he's going to be a little bit more defensively sound. I think he's going to try to rely a lot more on his jab to close the distance. And I think that's going to play right into the game of Charles Jourdain. I think he's going to be able to counter over top of that jab with his counter right a lot. I think the body kick's going to be open quite a bit too. But I'll throw up the same caveat that I did for when Vicente Luque fought Bilal Muhammad. Because, hey, I said Luque was going to win, but I also said if Bilal Muhammad could take him down one time, he's going to be able to do it more and more. I got very mad at Chael Sonnen, I remember, at question mark kicks. Now, I think this fight could go the same way. I'm going to pick Charles Jourdain, but I would not be surprised if Lando Vannata could out-wrestle him for 3 rounds.
I'm also going to pick Charles Jourdain for the reasons that we both made earlier, but again, if Lando Vannata goes to the well with his takedown, Charles Jourdain's takedown defense is less than stellar. And I know he's got a good move to get back up to his feet, but sometimes he also gets held down. So it's one of those ones where Lando, moving down in weight like he has, this will be his second fight at featherweight rather. Long time lightweight, physical advantage, and He's big around the shoulders, and for a guy who can wrestle, to keep you down with that upper body strength, it plays right into that. So I do like the counter right. I like the body kick. I like the leg kicks of Charles Jourdain. For those reasons, I'm taking him, but I absolutely love this fight. I'm going to watch it with pop and popcorn, and maybe Lando Vannata opens up goatee energy whoop ass, and we decide to crack some cans. But I think this is going to be an amazing fight. I know you're excited about this.
100%. These guys have insane highlight reel finishes in the UFC. I don't know how this fight will not be fight of the night at the end of it. This is one that, show your friends who don't know anything about MMA, I'm almost going to guarantee you that they're going to love Charles Jourdain versus Lando Vannata.
Should be a great one. Both of us going with Canada's own, Billy Quebec's own, Air Charles Jourdain to get the win. Absolutely love this fight. Let us know down below in the comments section who you have not only in this one, but the rest of the fights as well. Love to see that activity down there when you have a big time card coming up with the rest of this. Amanda Lemos taking on Jessica Andrade in that main event. So keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Absolute class. Coming up this weekend, we used to say it with Fight Night Picks, and we've gotten away from it, but I'm going to say it. Flyweight never die. We have the Tibetan Eagle, Sumudaerji, taking on... I'm a star boy, because I don't like to curse and swear on the YouTubes, but you got Manel Kape representing Portugal. And listen, Portugal, last weekend, Andrea Fialho, let's go! Let's go with the underdog. Let's go, pal. Big time win for Fialho. Can't wait to see more of him. But for Manel Kape, this is a guy that a lot of people knew outside of the UFC when he was fighting with Ryzen and other promotions. But of course, he becomes the Ryzen champion and wins at bantamweight, wearing the wrestling shoes in the ring. Question mark coming into the UFC. Maybe that was a reason for some of his early falters, but they matched him up with Alexandr Pantoja. No shame in that. And he loses split decision to Mateusz Nicolau, who's looked pretty good in the return. And that was a great fight, and you could have scored it either way, and I can make an argument either way as well. But when it comes to the two wins that Manel Kape's had since, there's an asterisk around the first one, because he missed weight when he took on Ode Osborne, and it wasn't a great look. However, wonderful knockout win. And then his next time, and he takes on old Zhalgas Zhumagulov out of Kazakhstan, and he picks up an amazing first-round knockout win. So it's almost like, hey, Manel's back. That wasn't a fluke. And those are giant wins. But for Sumudaerji, Matt, I'm going to say this, and I'm going to hand it off to you. He came into the UFC on a loss. That doesn't happen. A loss in WLF Wars to boot, where you go, what? And then he fights Louis Smoke and he loses. And you go, okay, this is going to be like not a one-and-done guy, because he already had the one, but this is going to be a two-and-done guy. He's looked very slick in his last three fights. Now, his last fight against Zaruk Adashev, and I want to say this before I do hand it off. That fight was last January. Decision win over Zaruk Adashev. You figure most guys are going to finish a guy that's 3-2 in MMA, but that didn't happen. Booked in April against Tim Elliott of last year once more. Fell out of that fight. There was a post that he had on Instagram that said that he required surgery due to a knee injury. So the Tibetan Eagle's been out for over a year now. Interesting to see what he comes out looking like in this fight, because what we know out of him, great shots down the pipe and really utilizes that distance and size very well.
Sumudaerji is MMA's campaign. Hear me out. Cameron Payne played for the Toronto Raptors, got cut by them. People thought he wasn't even an NBA caliber player.
After being a very high draft pick.
Exactly. Now he's with the Phoenix Suns in a new role, and since he isn't expected to be like the guy, he can fit in and really just accentuate all the things that he's really good at, and we don't need to worry about the negatives. For Sumudaerji, I didn't think he was like UFC caliber. I thought, okay, you're a flashy striker, but what else do you have? Because he wasn't really showing that much else in his fights up until this point. But on his win streak he's been able to go on in his last three fights, he really has to be able to at least prove that he has more than just the striking in his back pocket. But this is the weird thing about Manel Kape. This will be his fifth fight in the UFC. Every fight he has seems to be so important, though, no matter who he is in there against. Because, okay, you lose to Pantoja and Nicolau, that's fine, they're at the top of the division. Then you beat Zhalgas, that's fine, that's a good win. But nobody looks at Zhumagulov as like a real guy in this division that you have to beat to then become a top 10. You might be that guy, Craig, but I don't think there's a lot of people being like, wow, Zhalgas Zhumagulov, one of the top tier fighters.
Just down there all stiff and then he just wrestles.
So for Kape, this is a really good matchup because Sumudaerji to me is kind of the midway point between his two losses and his two wins. It's not a massive jump back up into the rankings to where you're fighting another top 5 guy and we don't really know if you're going to win. With Sumudaerji, there are holes in this game. Like, Manel Kape is the much better wrestler in this matchup. I would say he has the better hands, but I'm also going to throw a bunch of red flags on that. Manel Kape's striking does not look like it did when he was in Rizin. And it is interesting because he's someone who is a really good striker, but he relies a lot on his feints for the takedown to then open up some of his striking. And if he can't really use his wrestling effectively early on in matchups, you can tell guys don't necessarily have the respect for Manel Kape's striking as they did before. Now, maybe not the greatest idea because he does have really big power, but I do think on the feet against Sumudaerji, he's got to be really smart about when he picks his opportunities because Kape in combination I think will have a lot of success. But if he finds himself similar to what he was fighting like against Pantoja and against Nicolau, to where, oh, I'm okay to throw that single shot, kind of reset, then I'll figure out what I'm going to do, that's going to leave the door open for Sumudaerji to hit you with those really long-range shots down the middle. And the last thing I'll say about Mudaerji that I do like, you know what we both hate about Wu Yanan? How she's always moving when she's striking, and not in a good way. She's never planting on her shots. I like how Sumudaerji is kind of the midway point between the two. He has very, very active feet. He's never really set, but when he does decide to really set and throw with power, he can kind of play both those games, which I do like.
And that's a weird thing. So Manel Kape in those two fights, plant his feet, wait, paw the one hand out there, hit with the other, wait, one shot, but Wu Yanan, somebody always moving, always moving. Sumudaerji right between the two. And it's a decent comparison because, not the Chinese connection, but Sumudaerji coming off a knee injury. Wu Yanan coming off a knee injury. Hers is more recent. I can't believe how much she moved. And the leg kicks that she took, and she still moved
and
in
they were
that
heavy
fight.
Too.
So I'm interested to see if we do see Wu Yanan back with the UFC. I know she's 1-4 now, but it was an interesting fight that she had last weekend. So recency bias, what it is. But for Sumudaerji, the things that I have down, training at ATT for a long while now. You see Adriano Moraes there. Great win over Yuya Wakamatsu not that long ago. Before that, the DJ fight. Also, Kyoji Horiguchi and Alexandre Pantoja. So I'm interested to see the game plan there. Very, very good offensive output. Really tricky southpaw too. And with the movement, there's a lot to like out of Sumudaerji. Uses his length and his size, translated from bantamweight to flyweight, incredibly well. So as long as the weight cut goes well, very lean in that picture that you see before you. I love what Sumudaerji has. For Manel Kape, this doesn't stick to anything that I've seen from him outside of the UFC. Pre-UFC with Rizin, with the wrestling shoes, switching stances, can do it in combination, but when he switches stances, great lead hooks, great combinations, not huge on his kicks, but I love the versatility out of Manel Kape striking. It's an American Kickboxing Academy, Thailand and USA thing, but where he's mixed up camps, where he's gone to Extreme Couture to mix in some of that wrestling as well in the last couple of years, I'm really eager to see what version of Kape we get this weekend. So when it comes to the odds for this one, Sumudaerji open to plus 155 underdog. Plus 133 right now. For Manel Kape, open to minus 180. He's now a minus 160. So some things moving and shaking for the Tibetan Eagle.
I really like where those odds are, to be completely honest with you, though, because I came into this assuming Manel Kape was going to be a huge favorite, but I genuinely don't think he should be based on his activity or at least body of work in the UFC. He looked poor against two really good fighters. He looked pretty good against two fighters that he should have looked really good against. So again, I do think this is as perfect matchmaking as you can have for Kape, because Sumudaerji is a guy with a lot of talent, but we're not really sure where he fits in yet amongst the other top tier guys. So I really do like this matchmaking for the UFC.
And for Kape, I thought he didn't look too bad against Nicolau, but again, split decision loss, say what you will. Topology votes, though, not even close. 574 total votes, 84% Kape, 69% by knockout. For the 16% that have Sumudaerji, 78% by decision. So the voters with Kape overwhelmingly, the odds shifting Sumudaerji's way. When I'm making a pick on this one, Matt, when I went back and did the tape study, I was honestly having a hard time, and I didn't think I would.
I thought Manel Kape was going to beat Sumudaerji about 9 times out of 10, but this is the problem about Manel Kape. You're right, he really likes using his lead hooks, which is weird, because you have to get so close to your opponent to use your lead hook. And against a guy like Sumudaerji, it's really hard to get inside of his distance because he's not only long with his punches, he does move his feet. He's not somebody who, if you just keep on throwing, he'll move backwards and you'll catch him eventually. So I could see a world where Sumudaerji outstrikes Manel Kape like 100-20, and it's not a stoppage, but it just looks really one-sided based on the striking numbers. But there's another world where Manel Kape gets close to him, can take him to the ground, wears on him with some of his wrestling. I think that's going to be the key. If Kape can wear on Sumudaerji with some of his wrestling, I do think that's going to slow down the feet of Sumudaerji and make him more available to hit as this fight goes on, and that's why we'll pick Manel Kape.
I mean, for Sumudaerji, I'm sure he's improved his ground game. Obviously, you look at it, numbers on the page, all 4 of his losses are by submission. for Manel Kape, training it at Extreme Couture, you see guys in the picture like Dane Ige, you see Cody Garbrandt, and then 9 weeks ago, he's got a picture where he's smiling, hanging out with my guy. You know him as a guy who really likes to talk in a fighter's ear when they're making the fight walk and doesn't like right-handed sleeves. It's Dewey Cooper, and I absolutely love that. Black Cobra Striking System's own. I do have Manel Kape. Now again, out of the tape study, Sumudaerji, southpaw, different look, popping those jabs out there, following up with a left cross. There's a lot of things that cause the smaller fighter issues in a lot of Sumudaerji fights, so if you're picking up on that, you might like Sumudaerji. I do like Manel Kape. I'm assuming he can close the distance here for me to, pick him to win.
He's got to make weight, though.
And he's got to make the weight. Wasn't the issue against Jalga Shumagulov, was the issue against Ody Osborne. So both of us going with Portugal's own Manel Kape in this one. But listen, you can make a strong argument from Sumudaerji, and I'm sitting here with the AirPods in listening to you. So I absolutely love this fight. I think it's going to be a great one. Got some big-time ones left on this card. A personal favorite, Alexandr Romanov taking on Tanner Boser. We've got Andrade and Lemos in the main event. You're not going to want to miss. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. The future, Macy Barber, looking to make it a win streak, looking to make it 2 in a row and climb those rankings. Currently ranked number 14th when she takes on Montana De La Rosa. And realistically, do you call her the heavy-handed Montana De La Rosa? Because listen, in her last fight, she earned her first career victory as a professional by TKO. Now, I say do you call her heavy-handed because it's by TKO, but realistically, she had 4 minutes and 26 seconds of control time in the first round alone against Ariane Lipski, the Queen of Violence, who was the queen of not winning that fight. Second round, taken down, and then it's just all Montana De La Rosa. And realistically, I had this odd, in my mind's eye version of Montana De La Rosa that's not as impressive as she's been in the UFC. And then when I went back and I watched the fights and I realized, okay, fought on The Ultimate Fighter season, 26? When she fought and took on Ariel Beck, Matt's favorite fighter.
One of the worst fighters to ever step in an octagon. She gave up against Shayna Dobson.
But she beats Ariel Beck by first round Darce choke. Then she goes out there and loses to Nico Montano. Your eventual champion. She beats Christina Marks in the UFC, eventual bare knuckle boxer. She beats Rachel Ostovich. She beats Nadia Kasem. And then she loses to Andrioli. And then she beats Myra Barella. And then she loses to Viviane Araujo. And then she draws against Maeda Buena Silva. And then she beats Ariane Lipski. This is it. She's beaten fighters that haven't been that close to rankings at all. At all. And beats them impressively. And then she loses to not top 10, like top 7 fighters. You're losing to Andrea Lee. You're losing to Viviane Araujo. Those are very good fighters. You're drawing with Maeda Buena Silva, a good fighter. So it really is hard to have a good barometer as to where Montana De La Rosa is in the UFC. So I will say this. She's beaten not the greatest fighters, but beaten them impressively. Lipski was looking good before that fight against Montana De La Rosa. She trains, she's moved camps, but she is at Elevation Fight Team once more, training with Raquel Pennington, Tisha Torres, Lauren Murphy, Jessica Aguilar, JJ Aldrich, and Miranda Maverick, who I thought beat Macy Barber. That was Barber's last fight. Now, fight bookings, fight fallings out. This fight was originally supposed to take place in December at UFC 269. It has since moved around and been reshuffled. But for Barber, again, last time we saw her out was 8 months ago against Miranda Maverick in a fight that Miranda Maverick won the first 2 rounds of that fight.
It was a close fight, though.
It wasn't that close in those 2 rounds.
But again,
and Barber wins the third.
Again, I don't look at that fight, though, and think it's the worst robbery I've ever seen in my whole entire life.
20 of 20 on MMA decisions.
I also had Miranda Maverick winning.
Rather.
I also had Miranda Maverick winning. But again, I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's the worst decision I've ever seen in my whole entire life. For Barber, though, this is the good thing. We know what both fighters do to a T. I understand, we might not know where Montana De La Rosa exactly fits in the rankings, but I can tell you exactly what her MMA skill set is. She's a good wrestler, but I wouldn't say a great wrestler. Some of the top-tier grapplers can keep her off of them, but she's a fighter who needs to secure a takedown to win a fight. And I do think the Adria Lee fight kind of tells you everything you need to know about Montana De La Rosa in one fight, because she's doing okay when she is able to get it onto the mat, when she is able to get it close. But in open space, Montana De La Rosa does not have many weapons to really secure rounds and to get the fight in her side. When she is closing the distance, it is just to get that takedown, and there's not a lot of strikes that are coming behind it. And that's the thing. When you're fighting someone like Maycee Barber, Barber's whole style is built around, I'm going to defend your takedowns and try to beat you up on the feet. And we've seen that style doesn't necessarily work when you do fight the upper echelon in the division, and not even the upper echelon, just smart vets that have really tricky stances or really tricky games. Go back to the Roxanne fight. Like, even pre-knee injury, Roxanne was giving Maycee trouble just because she was so wonky in her stand-up and with her approaches. I just think stylistically, this is a much easier fight for Maycee Barber because at least Montana De La Rosa is there to be hit. And Barber's X factor, I would say, in this division is that she does have very, very big punching power. You do not want to be hit by her, especially not early on in a fight. I do think Montana De La Rosa is one of the more hittable fighters in this division. Like, Andrea Lee had her face all types of busted up in their fight, and Lee is by no means the type of power puncher that Maycee Barber is. So if De La Rosa is not able to secure those takedowns early in the fight, I can see a world where Barber's able to shuck her off repeatedly and just keep on landing damaging blows up against the cage throughout this fight. But if De La Rosa gets one takedown, she could probably get the second, she could probably get the third, and I do think she has the better cardio out of these two fighters in this matchup.
Weird thing is, Maycee Barber's another one of those fighters we kind of saw throughout her career, and it's still a very young career for both these women, but more so for Barber. She's not yet 24. She'll turn 24 here in the next few weeks. Switching gyms, and she spent some time at VFS Academy. Obviously, we might see a future champ out of that gym in Bilal Muhammad. He picked up a big win last weekend, but Barber used to be out of there. Now at Team Alpha Male, you see a lot of a guy who used to be in the UFC and yells constantly in the fights that he corners fighters in. I'm talking about Danny Castillo over at Team Alpha Male. So interesting move there for Barber. Obviously, Poppins trains at that gym, Corey McKenna, but also Darren Elkins, who else? Uriah Faber, who else? Cody Garbrandt used to train there.
Song Yadong's by far the best fighter right now.
Song Yadong. Like, there's so many fighters I could go down. Sage Northcutt's trained there. Colby Northcutt, Raymond Daniels. Like, I can make that lineage. But for Maycee Barber, boxing, pressure, usually takedowns, but I don't think that's the play here against De La Rosa. However, we have seen some fighters take De La Rosa down and have success, so it will be interesting to see what kind of a fight we get out of both of these women. Again, for De La Rosa, we focus on it. One performance bonus against Nadia Kasem, but again, in some of her fights, like, I guess you could say, what fight? Even in the fight, like, De La Rosa took Andrea Lee down, had some success, so I should back that up.
And also got lit up on the feet.
But that was tricky. So, Montana De La Rosa, bit of a Swiss Army knife. Maycee Barber, mostly the same thing, game in, game out. For Barber, open to minus 155, minus 188 right now. For Montana De La Rosa, open to plus 135, plus 155. We have a look at the votes on Topology. Surprise us they are to you. I'm going to say the future over under 77.5% Barber.
I was thinking 70, so I'll say slightly under.
Slightly under. 567 total votes. Usually pretty bad. You're doing good this week.
Thank you, I know.
Really good. 75% Barber. 84% by decision. For the 25% that I have De La Rosa, 83% by decision. People seeing it going to a decision.
This is one of those fights where if you just look at the resumes, 10 times out of 10, you're going to think Montana De La Rosa is going to win. Because I would say she has the much more accomplished resume. But the issue is you got to break down how they fight. And for Montana De La Rosa, she needs a takedown to win this fight. And she's fighting one of the more physically strong fighters of this weight class, who does have pretty good takedown defense as long as her knees are still working, who does have very heavy hands on the feet. I just think this is a recipe for disaster for Montana De La Rosa. Again, if she's able to secure that takedown early, I think she can rinse and repeat and have some success with that. I just think her striking defense is a massive liability when she's fighting someone who has the hand speed and power of someone like Barber. And again, this isn't me saying, okay, Maycee Barber's going to go back on her, I'm going to be the youngest title challenger or champion in UFC history. I don't think she has that kind of a future, but I do think she's a good enough fighter to beat Montana De La Rosa.
So I look at it this way. JJ Aldrich's been at Elevation forever, right? Miranda Maverick's bounced around in her young career, but she was at Elevation when she fought Maycee Barber. Elevation is 0-2 against Maycee Barber in those two fights because Aldrich got knocked out by Barber and Maverick lost a split decision that she won. And I'm going to hold that forever. But it's a win on Barber's record, so it's neither here nor there. Montana De La Rosa now gets another opportunity with that gym in her back pocket to get a win. So I'm eager to see what we get out of De La Rosa. I have Maycee Barber in this one. I think she has a decided striking advantage. But I'm eager to see what we get out of De La Rosa because if she can work in those takedowns, if she can get that top pressure, if she can hold Maycee Barber down, we know how good of a submission artist Montana De La Rosa is. Now all of a sudden she has a win by knockout her last time out, so I can't just say that she's just a submission artist. But I'm eager to see more so what we get out of De La Rosa and maybe some of the wrinkles that Team Alpha Male is able to throw in there, along with Danny Castillo's angry yelling out of the corner.
He had a nice record, too, that people don't realize. He fought a who's who of, like, world-class fighters.
So, a big-time opportunity for both these women. Both of us going with Maycee Barber to get the win. I can't wait for the fight and the rest of the fights on this main card that you're not going to want to miss. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. I'm going to start this video off for everybody that's in the car, everybody that's on an airplane, everybody that's reading a book and listening to a podcast and just, maybe they're learning a language at a third time. I'm going to ask everybody a question, and Matt, I'm going to direct it to you. How metal is Tanner Boser?
He's pretty metal.
He's pretty damn metal, because originally this weekend it was supposed to be Tanner Boser against Rodrigo Nascimento, and instead that bout sheet gets scrapped like a piece of paper, and then the UFC slides the contract across the table to go, hey Tanner, you want to fight Alexandr Romanov? You know, the guy who's undefeated, that's got the wildest background you've ever heard of in men's heavyweight MMA history. And Tanner went, yeah, give me that. I'll do it, I guess. So Tanner Boser went from fighting Nascimento, who is an odd fighter. He's the heaviest guy in the division, but he fights like the lightest guy in the division. He looks like the heaviest guy, but he's fleet of foot. And listen, did he have a very good fight against Alain Baudot? Well, who hasn't at this point? But he is an interesting guy to watch. And so that fight falls out, and all of a sudden Alexandr Romanov comes in. And how metal is Tanner Boser? Well, he opened a plus 130 in this fight. He's a plus 378. Alexandr Romanov opened minus 150. He's minus 522. That's how damn metal Tanner Boser is. So Alexandr Romanov, other than the blip on the radar to my guy, Juan Espino, Canary Islands own. And even though that's a win on Romanov's record, it was a technical split decision win. Other than that, he's looked absolutely amazing in the UFC. Wins over Roque Martinez, Rogerio de Lima, and Jared Vanderas last time out. Big step up from those guys to Tanner Boser, but I love this fight. I think this is going to be great.
I'll say step up. I'm not going to commit to big step up to Tanner Boser because Boser has not looked great as of late. I know he had a big win over OSP, but the weird thing about Boser is that he's fought a good number of light heavyweights up at the heavyweight division, and at a certain point, I wonder if that physicality is going to start to play against him because, listen, fighting Ilir Latifi's great. He's a strong guy. Fighting OSP is great at heavyweight. He's also a strong guy. Alexandr Romanov's nickname is King Kong. He fights like a WWE wrestler somehow made the transition to MMA. Like, I would love to be able to break it down and be like, hey, he fights like this fighter. But not many other fighters just rely on like body-to-body trips in the clinch and double-fisted ground and pound.
It's kind of like if you had, Minikov when he was at the height of his powers over with Bellator. If you just took him, cranked the dial and threw it away, because German suplexes are not off the table. But also, Romanov will keep his hands down at his waist and throw high kicks and then throw shovel punches to knock guys down. Like, this guy is an absolute treat.
Like, if he hit Tanner Boser with the old John Cena attitude adjustment midway through the fight, I wouldn't be surprised, because those are the types of techniques he does go for. But Romanov is a really interesting character, because he isn't a great striker, and I think he has kind of proved that up until this level in the UFC. He throws very hard, but there's a big difference between a guy who throws hard and a guy who's very technically sound in the UFC. And that's where Romanov falls into. Listen, I wouldn't want to get hit by him on the feet. I don't know many heavyweights who would want to. But you do realize that if you're a heavyweight like Tanner Boser, who is defensively sound, who doesn't get cracked a lot on the feet, you will be able to stand with a guy like Romanov, and as long as you keep your hands up, he's going to be hitting a lot of your arms, because that's the thing about Romanov. He's not a guy who will start to intelligently put his punches together. It's basically, I'm going to throw it, and if you defend it, great, you've defended it. If you don't defend it, then I will land very heavily. But he is going to have to rely on his wrestling in this fight against Boser, and I think Romanov can take Boser down, but my question in this fight is very similar to the Juan Espino matchup. When is Boser, or Espino, going to start taking over from Romanov? Because he burns so hot that, yes, round one's almost always a 10-8. There's always a lot of top pressure. You feel his physicality. But he does wear down as the fight goes on. It's really hard to be 263 pounds and throw your opponent across the cage and still keep a very high level of cardio throughout your fights. So it just feels like every time we talk about Romanov, it doesn't really matter who the opponent is, because they're always going to have better cardio than he is. They're always going to probably be the worst wrestler than he is, but they're always going to have a decided edge in the feet.
Hold the phone. So, Alexandr Romanov, I don't know about all of that, because he was booked in February to take on Ilir Latifi. Great wrestler. Very good wrestler.
Who's at 205 pounds.
Avid horseback rider, Ilir Latifi, out of Sweden, and I was eager to see that fight. Romanov withdraws, and then I was on r/BJJ, because I lurked there, and I see not that long after that, I see Romanov competing at a BJJ tournament against a guy. And then I see continuing on his Instagram tangent, so I went from Reddit to Instagram, lurking on the Underground Whisper Network, and Alexandr Romanov has been competing quite a lot at BJJ tournaments. So eager to see that progression of his game, because again, Tanner Boser, highly technical heavyweight with a striking, great 1-2, and really, when you look at Boser coming into the UFC, not a guy knocking out a ton of people, and then all of a sudden, knocking out Felipe Lins, knocking out Rafael Pessoa, getting knockout wins. In his fight against Andre Arlovski, could have gone either way, and then in his fight when he took on Ilir Latifi, he lost by split decision. He went with the numbers of, listen, his numbers were good on the feet, but he got taken down and controlled, and that was the thing, like, you go back last weekend and Dominic Cruz and Daniel Cormier, the DC squared, were talking a lot about, okay, this guy's control time really scores him a lot in the eyes of the judges. It's not supposed to, but it can. It's not supposed to. But in that fight for Boser against Latifi must have scored a lot with that top pressure.
I thought he lost both those fights.
Because in that fight, it was Latifi a lot with the takedowns. And Latifi, he's going to go forward, he's going to pressure, he's going to double leg, he's going to do whatever he can to take you down. Romanov can ankle pick you, for goodness sake.
And he's way bigger than Ilir Latifi. And I do think that's a really good comp to bring up, because if you look at what Latifi can do, yes, he doesn't really fit into this weight class. It does look a little bit ridiculous when he's fighting heavyweights, because he does not match up physically with them whatsoever. But if you look at what his strengths are at this weight class, well, Romanov has a lot of those same strengths. I would say Ilir Latifi's the crisper striker and keeps things a little bit more down the middle, but his wrestling game and his top pressure are very similar. The difference is Romanov is that much stronger and that much more explosive with all of his takedowns. I just worry about what version of Romanov is going to look like when he is in the third round against a guy like Tanner Boser, even further up the division. Let's say he somehow gets into the top 5 and can fight a guy like Stipe. Like, we don't really know what version of Romanov we're ever going to get when we do get into the second and third round, because he is able to just dominate people for the most part early on in his fight. So I'll be very interested to see, what does he look like when he fights someone who can at least match his wrestling a little bit and force him to use his weakness, which I would say is a stand-up.
Yeah, I'm really eager to see once either of these guys face the upper echelon, but to make the example out of the Moldovan here, it's almost like when you're at a Blue Jays game at Skydome and you're there for batting practice. You want to see people hit fifth deck like Jose Canseco in the 90s. And you're there and the pitchers, they're out in the outfield. And people might not get this, but please, I implore you, do your research on this. The flip side of people hitting moonshots is pitchers in the outfield throwing balls to the people at the hotel in the outfield. Oh, you didn't know there was a hotel in the outfield there? There is. And the windows go up and down. I guess they kind of go down so the top opens, and pitchers will throw the ball up for people in the hotel to then grab and have a souvenir. And I remember going to a game at one point. My favorite Australian pitcher, Grant Balfour, was there for your Oakland A's.
Not Peter Moylan?
And he was just whipping balls up there, trying to get them to people. I want to see somebody whip Alexandr Romanov up into the hotel at Skydome, and for him to get the opportunity to fight those top guys to see what he can do to make some noise up there. So hopefully somebody was along for the ride on my tangent. I already brought up the odds. Romanov now a juiced favorite. We're going to talk about the votes on Topology. I don't anticipate them to be close. I'm going to say over under 82.5% Romanov.
I was going to say 80%, so I'll say above.
It is above a little bit. 545 total votes, 89% Romanov, 22% by decision, 43% by submission, and 28% by knockout. For the 11% that have Boser, 55% by knockout, 40% by decision. This is aim big, miss big for Boser, going from Nascimento. That would have been a fun fight. Like, Nascimento kind of plots forward, but he's there to get hit as well. I would have had Boser against Nascimento. Would have been a great fight. Romanov, though, I got to go Romanov.
I also have Romanov, but this is one of those fights where cardio is going to be the death of Romanov
and
eventually.
Boser has very good at cardio.
Exactly. Boser fights like a middleweight at heavyweight. He doesn't have a lot of knockout power. I know he's shown a little bit more of it later, but I still don't look at Tanner Boser as a true knockout artist at this weight class. I definitely think he has the better stand-up, but I do think he is the steadier fighter in this fight, and that's going to have to pay off for him. He's going to have to take this into the deep waters, make Romanov really work hard early on in the fight, and I do think Tanner Boser can have success later, but I don't think that's going to happen. I expect Romanov to go for takedowns early and often. I expect him to get them. And the earlier he's able to get those takedowns, the less he's going to have to work for them. So I do have Romanov, but it's going to be one of those cases to where when it goes bad, it's going to go really, really, really bad. I just don't think it's going to be this weekend.
Big time opportunity for both of these men, both of us going with King Kong Romanov to get the win. Let us know down below in the comments section if we're wrong. Do you have the Canadian in this matchup? Us Canadians, we do not, but it should be a great fight nonetheless. 2 big fights left on this card. Clay Guida taking on Claudio Puelles, and in the main event, Amanda Lemos taking on Jessica Andrade. You're not going to want to miss. Keep locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say.
Let's get into it.
How many times has Clay Guida, have we said, been a gatekeeper in a big-time spot against an up-and-coming prospect? This is no new thing. 2 fights ago, co-main event spot, Marc O. Madsen. And in that fight, a split decision win for Marc O. Madsen. So Guida goes out, takes on my guy, Leonardo Santos. Fight Night Picks fans on Twitter, on Instagram, on the YouTubes, you folks know that I have a soft spot for Leonardo Santos. And in that fight, Leonardo Santos, I don't know why he didn't get the finish against Clay Guida in the first round. The referee decided, hey, let's let this one simmer. And so they do. And Leonardo, unleashed his 40-year-old gas tank in the first round. And Guida comes back and looks great and submits a ginormous black belt in Santos in that fight. So a huge feather in the cap of the carpenter to come into this fight and take on Claudio Puelles. Now, Matt, I've had a lot to say about Puelles since he had that long hiatus before he fought Jordan Levitt, before he came back and fought a guy like Marcos Mariano. So 10 months ago, he comes back, fights Jordan Levitt, wins a decision. Entirely forgettable fight in that one. Then he comes out and fights Chris Gruetzemacher. And listen, I know in my analogies and in my stories, I could reach back in my memory bank and go, hey, well, Claudio Puelles was on the Ultimate Fighter Latin America Season 3, and he was able to get wins over Jose David Flores, over Pablo Sabari, over Marcelo Rojo by decision. But then, when the lights were brightest, when he was 19 years old, and he fought Martin Bravo, he did not win that season of the Ultimate Fighter at lightweight, okay? So then he goes out and he fights Felipe Silva. And you might go, okay, well, he won that fight by knee bar, and he beat Chris Gruetzemacher by knee bar, so he's a knee bar specialist. Yeah, okay, I'll give you that. Remember, though, that Felipe Silva beat the brakes off Claudio Puelles for the first round, the second round, until the third round when Puelles gets that knee bar. And Puelles' eye is mangled. It was an amazing performance. And then Puelles takes a bit of time off, fights Marcos Mariano, Anderson Silva's protege. I don't know if Steven Seagal had any bit in the development of Marcos Mariano, but I do know. It would have been
better if he did.
Mariano came into the UFC at 6-4. He left at 6-6, and Claudio Puelles was able to get a dominant decision win, like 30-25s out there for Puelles. Then his next time out, after a very long time away, he fights Jordan Levitt, and I had to say in that fight, high crotch single leg is Claudio Puelles' best weapon. His striking offense and defense is not that good. He came out of a gym in the Fight Lab, Peru, not very known because, again, he is Peruvian. Beats Jordan Levitt because both guys do the same thing. High crotch singles, weird striking. And then Puelles' last time out against Chris Gruetzemacher, it was finally like, okay, we're going to learn something. And he knee bars him, and it was very, very impressive. And for the last fight against Gruetzemacher, as well as this fight coming up here, training out of Sanford MMA, I think we're only going to get better wrestling takedowns out of Puelles, maybe not committed to that one high crotch single every time, and maybe a little bit more crispness in his hands. But he has a tough test against him because for Clay Guida, the guy's everywhere all at once, and he has good takedown defense. So this is an interesting matchup for both these guys.
But Guida is a much lesser version of himself at 40 years old than he was even back at 35. And the Santos fight is a bit of an anomaly, but here's the thing. Santos himself is in his 40s. So that's one of those, okay, I might be an old man, but so are you, and my old man cardio is better than your old man cardio. And that is the thing about Clay Guida. Normally when fighters get older, their durability takes a big hit, and their cardio takes a big hit. Clay Guida, for the most part, is still a fairly durable fighter, I would say. He can't eat the same shots he used to, but he used to be in, blood and guts brawls every single time he was in there. Now he can still eat a shot and give a shot. You just don't really love it out of the 40-year-old. I still really like his cardio, though, and his overall work rate really is good, because Clay Guida, even at 40 years old, is always doing something. And that's a really important thing in MMA, because there's even good fighters in this sport who spend long minutes of inactivity, or just long periods within rounds of inactivity. Clay Guida has never had that issue throughout his career. That's a really nice thing, because that's something that is a big hurdle for guys to, get over, because they have to trust their own cardio. Clay Guida trusts his own cardio, and that's a very nice thing to see. This is an awful fight to break down, though, because I'm going to look dumb no matter what I say. I know for a fact Claudio Puelles is probably going to win by submission, but I can't pick him to win this fight. And I know that sounds like a really weird thing to say so early on in this breakdown, but okay. Who's going to win every exchange on the feet for the most part? Clay Guida, in my mind, is going to be able to hit Claudio Puelles 4 times for every 1 time Claudio hits Clay Guida. And okay, Guida at 40, do I worry about his chin? Maybe a little bit, but is Claudio Puelles really the guy who's going to be able to go in there, put a lot of strikes together and hurt him? No, but I will say this. I think in the clinch, Claudio has decent strikes that could hurt Clay Guida. I do agree with you. He does like to go to that single leg, but when he is in the clinch, he will try to throw some elbows every now and then, try to throw some hooks while they exit the clinch. I do think those are strikes that could catch Clay Guida with his hands down where he's maybe not looking, because those are the strikes that always hurt you, the ones that you don't see coming. But for the most part, Clay Guida has way better cardio than Claudio Puelles, and it's not even close, I don't believe. He's the far better wrestler. He's the more dynamic wrestler. Other than age, I really like Clay Guida in this matchup, but I can admit that even if he goes for the offensive takedown, like I'm assuming he's going to at some point in this fight, because Clay Guida just does that in his fights. I'm not saying it's a good idea. I'm just saying he's probably going to do it. That's when Puelles' BJJ can really show how effective it is. He can sweep from the bottom. He's a very heavy fighter on top. He's just one of those fighters to where he's such a specialist, but I almost feel like Clay Guida is going to show him that specialty at some point throughout this fight.
Again, I can't stress this enough. I can't wait to see the development of Puelles, because again, he was 19 years old and beat Marcelo Rojo, who at the time was in his mid-20s. So it's crazy to see Puelles for the inactivity, just to see, okay, well, you lost to Martin Bravo, but realistically, since then, it's been a clean sheet. It's 4-1 so far, like my Tottenham Hotspur, who lost to Brighton Hove Albion on the weekend, 1-0. What are we doing here, Tottenham?
Any of that, man.
Get it going! Listen, there's a few people out there that know I'm a Tottenham fan that ask for the references, so you can see that I'm not that happy with the way they performed over the weekend. Love myself some Sonny. But when it comes to this fight, Matt, for El Nino, I do like what we've seen. I love that Gritzmacher win. Again, if I saw a picture of Clay Guida, because I've been wearing my glasses all day, so vision hasn't been my strong suit in this episode, but really, if you put a picture in the corner of the room and went, hey, is that Clay Guida or Chris Gritzmacher? I'd have to really, really think about it.
I mean, the hair length
beard, hair, no, they both have long hair. It's kind of curly.
Much longer.
No, Chris Gritzmacher has longer
hair. I
hear
you. I just feel like Clay Guida's is iconic at this point. It flows, it goes around. Gritzmacher at least ties his up, looks a little professional.
In the pictures, they look very, very similar. So the other thing that isn't so similar, though, Guida marked height disadvantage and reach advantage in this fight. And oh, by the way, I can guarantee you one thing out of this fight. John Anik will make a Mike Gundy reference and say that this man is 40. And yes, Clay Guida is 40. So we talk about the odds for this one. Surprised the hell out of me as, like, what we do to break the fourth wall. I write down all my notes. We do everything, whatever. We kind of discuss picks, but then we write down the odds right before the individual video. When I wrote down Clay Guida open a plus 150 and is now a minus 125, I was like, what? I said that out loud. Claudio Puelles open minus 175 is minus 101. So the odds have shifted and Guida's the favorite. The votes on Tapology, though, that's a surprise to us. It is to you. I'm going to say over under 65% Claudio Puelles.
I was going to say 70 Puelles, so I'll say above.
All right, look at that.
On the dot.
You looked at these
I did not, I swear.
615
Normally
total votes.
I'm wrong every time, so eventually I'm going to be right every time.
70% Puelles, 68% by decision. For the 30% that have Guida, 84% by decision. Matt, you already let the cat out of the bag, so...
Not really, though. Here's the thing. I want to pick Clay Guida. This is an awful fight to break down, though, because I'm going to look dumb no matter what I say. I know for a fact Claudio Puelles is probably going to win by submission, but I can't pick him to win this fight. And I know that sounds like a really weird thing to say so early on in this breakdown, because Clay Guida in his prime is the exact fighter who gives Claudio Puelles a lot of issues. He has the great cardio. He's very hard to take down. He's very good at his defensive jiu-jitsu. But that is the problem. He's 40 years old at this point, and he had a lot of trouble against Leonardo Santos in the early going of their fight. You can't just get lost in his big comeback win, so against my better judgment, I am going to pick Claudio Puelles, because this is what I go back to a lot. MMA in the UFC is a lot more like boxing than I think we realize. And I think they want the younger guy who has a little bit more hype on a winning streak to beat the older 40-year-old who has a lot more hype behind him. So I'm going to pick Claudio Puelles, maybe against my better judgment, but this is one of those fights that I see as a total coin flip. Either the old guy puts on that classic vet performance and makes you believe that, okay, the Carpenter's back for one more, or Claudio Puelles is going to knee bar him and look ridiculous off his back. And I do think Claudio Puelles' jiu-jitsu is enough of an X factor to give him the win.
Santos, long-rangey striker, knocked down Guida at the start, almost had him finished on the mat, and then ran out of gas. And I'm incredibly surprised that the referee let that one continue on. Poyas isn't snappy like that with his striking. Decent kicks, but again, very, very low output. Poor striking defense. I like Clay Guida with the movement and the volume at 40 years old to get the win in this fight. Again, defensive wrestling is Clay Guida on numbers on a stat page, 68% takedown defense. Consider how long Clay Guida's been in the UFC.
And against great wrestlers.
How many fights against great wrestlers as well. So for me, I like Clay Guida in this spot, but for Poyas, great submission ability, and to be able to have the Carney in your back pocket and Nick Lentz to coach you through some of these positions, I think that is paramount for Poyas. So, splitting the pick on this one, Matt going with Peru's Poyas. I'm going with Team Alpha Male Zone, Clay Guida to get the win. Let us know down below in the comments section who you have when you have a big-time main event coming up between Amanda Lemos and Jessica Andrade, power punchers at strawweight that you're not going to want to miss. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. We always say, let's get into it. Coming up this weekend, big-time main event at strawweight. Listen, you might be down on the card. We're here to get you excited. As always, one half of your hosting duo, Craig Allen. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at CraigAllenFNP. With me to my left, to your right, as always, Matt Allen FNP. Now listen, it's baseball season, and these two are like Vladdy Guerrero Jr. and Shohei Ohtani going for the MVP. Now, one can pitch and one can't in that instance. However, my comparison is both home run hitters at strawweight because these women are knockout artists to the nth degree. And for Lemos, you might go, but Craig, her last time out, she didn't get the knockout. But remember this, walking forward, she landed a front kick that knocked down Angela Hill. That type of stuff doesn't happen at strawweight. She knocks out Montserrat Conejo before that. Before that, she knocks out Lavinia Souza, the Brazilian gangster. Before that, she has a decision fight against Mizuki Inoue. But again, for Amanda Lemos, a wild trajectory since she lost in a knock-em-out, drag-em-out type of fight against Leslie Smith at bantamweight in her debut years ago. Oh yeah, and for Jessica Andrade, former strawweight champion, didn't get it done at flyweight, and she is the number one ranked flyweight at this point, because let's not forget, the body shot sends her backward finish over Caitlin Chookagian, the loss to Valentina Shevchenko. Oh, and by the way, she just has a first-round finish win over Cynthia Calvillo a few months ago. So wild to see that for Andrade. And honestly, I'm surprised that she's moving back down to strawweight after the fact that you're the number one flyweight.
Well, here's the wild thing for Jessica Andrade, though. She's kind of in a category of her own in both these weight classes. At the strawweight division, yes, you have Joanna, you have Rose, you have Weili, but I consider Andrade to be right in that top four category of who we'd consider the elite of this weight class. But you're 100% right. She went out there and beat the number one contender, Caitlin Chookagian, at the time. And Cynthia Calvillo, people forget, had a main event win over Jessica Ai, which means the UFC thinks very highly of you if you're in that main event slot. She didn't even belong in there with Jessica Andrade. Like, Andrade was so much better than everyone at 125, not named Valentina Shevchenko, that I agree with you. It is a little bit odd for her to come back down to this weight class, but I genuinely think strawweight's the only place to find a competitive fight for her that isn't a title fight, because we've seen her have success at 135. Like, she beat Raquel Pennington by split decision. And yes, that was way back in the day, but that just tells you how physically strong Jessica Andrade is. She was a champion at strawweight, but was able to throw around fighters at women's bantamweight, and she's only, 5'1"? Physically, she does not match up with a lot of these women, but she's able to overpower each and every one of them, and the thing I really like about Andrade is that she has great cardio for someone who uses so much physical strength. We don't often look at Andrade and think, wow, the fighter we see in round 1 is a very different fighter than we see in round 5. Of course she gets tired, it's the natural progression of a fight, but she can keep a very high and sustained output, even in a very tough back and forth fight, which I really like going into this one against Amanda Lemos, because I think Lemos is going to have a lot of success early. She's a great counter striker, a great striker down the middle too, and that's something Andrade has real big troubles with, because Andrade, if she had trouble physically at bantamweight, it's weird. She still has those troubles down at strawweight because she's that much smaller than the majority of the opposition she's in there against. And I could see this fight going similar to the fight against Rose Namajunas, to where Andrade having a hard time getting on the inside, getting tagged a lot trying to go on the inside. The knees of Lemos are really good. Rose Namajunas is able to drop Jessica Andrade with the knee. But I do think that the cardio of Andrade is such an X factor in this fight that if she is able to weather that big storm from Lemos, get past the first round, second round, maybe even get it into the third round, start implementing her wrestling, I think that's when Andrade can start to take over. But I will say this, I think this is a much harder fight for Andrade than her last 2 wins at women's flyweight. And I know that might seem weird because Lemos had a really close fight in her last one against Angela Hill, who I think we can all agree isn't really at the top of the division anymore. But I still think stylistically, this is a really hard matchup for Jessica Andrade.
So the craziest part about it is, if you look at it for Lemos, she fights Miranda Granger. She submits her very, very quickly in that after the very, very long layoff. So that was from 2017 when she fought Leslie Smith to 2019 when she fights Granger. 2020 kicking it off, fighting Mizuki Inoue. Outstrikes her, takes her down, knocks her down. She knocks down Lavinia Souza twice. Lavinia didn't even look ready from the start of that fight. It was really, really weird. Then she fights Montserrat Conejo, finishes her in 35 seconds. Then she fights Angela Hill, and everybody's singing the praises of Amanda Lemos, including myself. Knocks her down in the first round. And then I had Angela Hill winning the second round on volume and, listen, good volume and at a good percentage. And then in the third round, Hill takes down Amanda Lemos and out-volumes her. So for me, 2 rounds to 1 for Hill, but ultimately it is Lemos getting the win by split. It was a fight of the night. It was a very, very good fight. And the craziest part about it is Hill's resiliency against Lemos after getting knocked down in the first round of that fight. Remember this. Angela Hill knocked down Jessica Andrade. You might think that's crazy.
She also lost that fight 30-26.
Lost it, and that was a fight of the night as well. You also had Rose Namajunas, who was able to knock down Jessica Andrade and Zhang Weili, and that was when Weili was able to win the title. But also Namajunas dropped her in the fight where Jessica Andrade picked her up and slammed her. So it's just crazy, kind of the way that this division just works out.
Do you know what I really like about Andrade, though? Her defensive submissions. We never really see her get put into that position. But I go back to the Joanne Calderwood fight. That was one of her first fights down at strawweight. She almost popped her head off with a guillotine. It was one of the not grossest submissions, but it was just a beautiful execution of it from Andrade. It reminded you that, hey, she's not just that brute wrestler and that brute power puncher. There is some technique to her game, too. And I do feel like that's the thing that gets lost with Jessica Andrade. Jerry West has this really good quote about Kevin Durant. And it's, Kevin, You're not going to be recognized in this league for all the other great things you do because you're such a great scorer. And people in this league get infatuated with scoring to where they don't recognize the other great things you do. Jessica Andrade isn't Kevin Durant of women's MMA. But people do kind of get caught up in her power punching and they forget how good of a wrestler she is. They forget how good of a grappler she is. And I really do think that the grappling in this fight is going to be her X factor. I think Lemos can have success early with her striking, but I do think that if she starts to tire like she did against Angela Hill, Andrade's going to pick her up over her head and slam her down time and time again, because Andrade doesn't get tired even though she's going for slams. Normally, if you're a wrestler, you want to go for like dump single legs and trips to conserve your energy. Andrade is more than happy to pick opponents up over her head and slam them down. And the last thing I'll say, I'm so happy you brought up Vladimir Guerrero Jr. to start this video, because I'm not going to lie, the first sentence I was going to say was about him too. This fight and their ages are weird. It's like, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is younger than the #1 prospect in baseball right now. Even though he's been in the league for a couple of years, he was just so young when he entered that you're like, wow, he's still only 21.
Bobby Witt Jr. has a very high ceiling.
Bobby Witt Jr. is really good. It's just wild to think that Bobby Witt Jr. is older than Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and Jr. is still this good up until this point. The ages of both women in this main event are kind of similar to that, where Andrade has been in the sport for a very long time. We've been following the career of Jessica Andrade for years and years now. Lemos is the new fighter on the scene, but she is still quite a bit older when it just comes to their ages off a piece of paper.
I mean, Jessica Andrade is 30, debuted in the UFC in 2013, so like 2013 and your World Series champion, Boston Red Sox with Mike Napoli. I'll flare it. Like, that guy loved to wear a jersey low.
He did.
Loved it. Just pimping, mashing extra inning home runs, and then transitioning from catcher to first base due to like congenital hip issues. So, Mike Napoli, a real one. A Blue Jay for what? Like a day? Like a couple hours?
Traded Vernon Wells for him, I remember.
Wild stuff. And wasn't it Francisco, the pitcher in that trade? But when we focus on this one in terms of the odds, because nobody wants to hear about the Jays, Amanda Lemos opened a plus 170. She is now a plus 148 on best fight odds. For Jessica Andrade, open to minus 200, minus 178. We have a look at the Tapology votes. They will be a surprise to us there. To you and Matt, I'll open this one up to the community tab because I also threw that one out there. We'll give the Tapology voters a second. I'm going to say over under 65% Andrade.
I was going to say 70 Andrade, though.
You're going to say, and it is. So 610 total votes, 78% Andrade. You get 72% by knockout. For the 22% that have Lemos, 46% by decision, 42% by knockout. That decision by the fans kind of surprises me for Lemos. Them seeing her winning by decision. Do you agree there?
I really don't, because we've seen Jessica Andrade in a 5-round atmosphere. Not once, not twice. She's been in 5-round fights for a long time now. We've never seen Lemos face that kind of late fight adversity, and I really do think that matters. Facing adversity in round 1 of a fight is tough, don't get me wrong, but at least you're fresh. Getting slammed on your head by Jessica Andrade in minute 4 of round 4 in a fight, like, that's a tough thing to keep on wanting to go through minute after minute, and I don't think Lemos can withstand the physicality of someone like Andrade late.
No, so misunderstanding there.
No,
I mean,
that's why I don't think she's going to be able to win a decision. I really do think every minute that ticks off the clock is going to favor Andrade more, and just by that, I think Andrade's more likely to win a decision.
595 votes in the Fight Night Picks YouTube community tab. If you're on YouTube, click on that community tab. 74% Andrade in the comments section. Now it gets fun. DJ0, you have too many numbers in your name. This is an absolute steal to get Andrade. That's not going to last. Billy Cipher saying I'm taking Andrade because she only seems to lose to champs and former champs. Jordan Kinney saying, yeah, Lemos doesn't have 5-round cardio. We just don't know, I guess. Nico saying Lemos' power is scary, but I don't know if she has the cardio to go 5 rounds. This seems to be a theme. Zoe saying, y'all are crazy. I'm taking the odds all day. Your boy going to make some bank. And she going to piece Andrade up. So going with Lemos in that one. And Dravi20 saying, when will the video drop, boys? And Fight Night Picks saying tomorrow night. So, yeah.
We're working on them.
That was me. This one coming out on Monday night. We tape on Sunday. So, Matt, in this one, fan going with Lemos. We only had one person say Lemos. Everybody else going with Andrade based on the body of work that they've seen. So, what are you saying here?
It's weird because I don't think she's going to be recognized as this, but I truly believe Jessica Andrade is one of the greatest female MMA fighters of all time. I know she
100%.
has some losses, but when you look at her body of work, it is undeniable who she's fought across multiple weight classes and her accomplishments. And I really do think that that experience is going to pay off in droves against someone like Amanda Lemos, who has looked really good. But she's looked really good against fighters like Montserrat Louis. She's looked really good against Mizuki Inoue, who aren't terrible fighters, but you can't sit here and tell me Jessica Andrade wouldn't starch both those fighters in record amounts of time. So I do feel like this is a huge step up in competition for Amanda Lemos. So maybe she can prove me wrong, have the performance of a lifetime, knock out Jessica Andrade, and prove why she's a top fighter at this weight class. But I do like Andrade, at least as of right now. But these are the red flags I'll put up. Andrade's chin isn't as good as it used to be, even though she still gets into firefights. And at 115 pounds, she hasn't cut this weight in a little bit of time. So if you are curious about her chin, and if you do worry about it taking the shots from Amanda Lemos, maybe you like the fact that Andrade is cutting an extra 10 pounds, but I will pick Andrade.
I really thought Vicente Luque was going to win last weekend's main event against Bilal Muhammad. And boy, don't I look silly in that one. Now, it gets clouded over the fact that we had a good weekend. But realistically, I had some confidence going with Vicente Luque. I had him in the question mark kicks parlay. Nix that one. I got that one wrong. I have that same type of confidence, oddly, with Jessica Andrade. So now I'm like second guessing myself. I feel weird.
Don't do it, Craig. You got this.
I feel weird. So I'm going to go with Jessica Andrade. I don't have much going on, and I won't have much going on in this card. And chances are, to be completely honest with you, I'm probably going to retire the question mark kicks parlay for a weekend, sit back and watch the oddities that are Dean Barry against 0-1 with a no contest Mike Jackson, you know, the thriller. So I'm eager to see that fight. I'm eager to see this one as well. I have Andrade for the reasons that we talked about earlier on. But Matt,
that's a barn burner.
We do have question mark kicks, and if anything switches up during the week, what happens on Saturday 2 hours before the prelims?
Well, I have great news for everybody. We do have a chance to backtrack on some of our picks, and we don't often do it, let's be honest. Normally, our picks at the start of the week are the ones that we stay with throughout, unless we did get a big update on perhaps like an injury someone sustained, or maybe they look terrible on the weigh-ins, or any kind of weird details like that. Gives us one last chance to go through the card, hang out with you guys, interact a little bit. It always gets me more amped for the fights, I know that.
Yeah, it definitely is the greatest part of the week when it comes to Fight Night Picks. And I mean, last weekend, again, 11-3 the total record from the big card, so it was a lot of fun that way. And we had so much fun talking with everybody in that chat. So I think last weekend we actually agreed on every pick. This week I think there's only one that we disagree on, possibly.
I think there might be a couple.
One, maybe two, but things are lining up pretty darn close. It's been a very competitive year this way in terms of the picks, I should say. So I'm really looking forward to question mark kicks. Really looking forward to this card, and hopefully you really enjoy it, and we punched up and we made it more fun than just numbers on a page. So ultimately, a big time card. Subscribe if you haven't already. We don't normally ask for that one. Toss a like if you will. And keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks. As we always say, let's get into it.